Section 6 of the Golden Bough, Chapter 5, The Burning of Melkarth. Semitic custom of sacrificing a member of the royal family, the burning of Melkarth at Tyre, festival of the awakening of Hercules at Tyre. If a custom of putting a king or his son to death in the character of a god has left small traces of itself in Cyprus, an island where the fierce zeal of Semitic religion was early trampled by Greek humanity, the vestiges of that gloomy rite are clearer in Phoenicia itself and in the Phoenician colonies, which lay more remote from the highways of Grecian commerce. We know that the Semites were in the habit of sacrificing some of their children, generally the firstborn, either as a tribute regularly due to the deity or to appease his anger in seasons of public danger and calamity. If commoners did so, it is likely that kings, with all their heavy responsibilities, could exempt themselves from this dreadful sacrifice for the fatherland. In point of fact, history informs us that kings steeled themselves to do as others did. It deserves to be noticed that if Mesha, king of Moab, who sacrificed his eldest son by fire, claimed to be a son of his god, he would no doubt transmit his divinity to his offspring, and further, that the same sacrifice is said to have been performed in the same way by the divine founder of Byblos, the great seat of the worship of Adonis. This suggests that the human representatives of Adonis formerly perished in the flames. At all events, a custom of periodically burning the chief god of the city in effigy appears to have prevailed at Tyre and in the Tyrian colonies down to a late time, and the effigy may well have been a later substitute for a man. For Melkarth, the great god of Tyre, was identified by the Greeks with Hercules, who is said to have burned himself to death on a great pyre, ascending up to heaven in a cloud and a peal of thunder. The common Greek legend, immortalized by Sophocles, laid the scene of the fiery tragedy on the top of Mount Oeta. But another version transferred it significantly to Tyre itself. Combined with the other evidence which I shall adduce, this latter tradition raises a strong presumption that an effigy of Hercules, or rather of Melkarth, was regularly burned at a great festival in Tyre. That festival may have been the one known as the Awakening of Hercules, which was held in the month of Peritius, answering nearly to January. The name of the festival suggests that the dramatic representation of the death of the god on the pyre was followed by a semblance of his resurrection. The mode in which the resurrection was supposed to be effected is perhaps indicated by the statement of a Greek writer that the Phoenicians used to sacrifice quails to Hercules because Hercules, on his journey to Libya, had been slain by Typhon and brought to life again by Adonis, who held a quail under his nose. The dead god snuffed at the bird and revived. That the death and resurrection of Melkarth was celebrated at an annual festival at Tyre has been recognized by scholars. See Roel Rochette, Sur le Hercule Assyrien et Phonicien, Memoires de l'Académie des Inscriptions et Belles Lettres, 17. Duxum Partier, Paris 1848. pp. 25 SQQ, H. Hubert et M. Morse, Essai sur le sacrifice, l'année sociologique, Volume 2, 1899, page 122-124. M. J. Lagrange, Etudes sur la religious Semitics, page 308-311. Aeolus is identified by some modern scholars with Ishman, a Phoenician and Carthaginian deity about whom little is known. See F. C. Murus de Phoenizizer, 1, Bonn 1841, page 536, SQQ F. B. Efkind, Beiträge zur Semitischen Religionsgeschichte, Berlin 1888, page 44, SQQ C. P. Tayel, Geschichte der Religion in Altrien, Gotha 1896-1903, 268 W. Graf Bondisien, Adonis and Esman, page 282, SQQ. According to another account, Aeolus burnt a quail alive, and the dead hero, who loved quails, came to life again through the savoury smell of the roasted bird. This later tradition seems to point to a custom of burning the quails alive in the Phoenician sacrifices to Melkarth. A festival of the god's resurrection might appropriately be held in spring, when the quails migrate northwards across the Mediterranean in great bands, and immense numbers of them are netted for the market. In the month of March, the birds return to Palestine by myriads in a single night, and remain to breed in all the open plains, marshes, and cornfields. Certainly a close connection seems to have substituted between quails and Melkarth, for legend ran that Asteria, the mother of the Tyrian Hercules, that is, of Melkarth, was transformed into a quail. It was probably to this annual festival of the death and resurrection of Melkarth that the Carthaginians would want to send ambassadors every year to Tyre, their mother city. Worship of Melkarth at Gades, and trace of a custom of burning him there in effigy. In Gades, the modern Cadiz, an early colony of Tyre on the Atlantic coast of Spain, there was an ancient, famous, and wealthy sanctuary of Hercules, the Tyrian Melkarth. Indeed, the god was said to be buried on the spot. No image stood in his temple, but a perpetual fire burned on the altar, and incense was offered by white-robed priests with bare feet and shorn heads who were bound to chastity. Neither women nor pigs might pollute the holy place by their presence. In later times, many distinguished Romans went on pilgrimage to this remote shrine on the Atlantic shore when they were about to embark on some perilous enterprise, and they returned to it to pay their vows when their petitions had been granted. One of the last things Hannibal himself did before he marched on Italy was to repair to Gades and offer up to Melkarth prayers which were never to be answered. Soon after he dreamed an ominous dream. Now it would appear that at Gades, as at Tyre, though no image of Melkarth stood in the temple, an effigy of him was made up and burned at a yearly festival. For a certain Cleon of Magnesia related how, visiting Gades, he was obliged to sail away from the island with the rest of the multitude in obedience to the command of Hercules, that is, of Melkarth, and how on their return they found a monstrous man of the sea stranded on the beach and burning, for the god, they were told, had struck him with a thunderbolt. We may conjecture that at the annual festival of Melkarth, strangers were obliged to quit the city, and that, in their absence, the mystery of burning the god was consummated. What Cleon and the rest saw on their return to Gades would, on this hypothesis, be the smouldering remains of a gigantic effigy of Melkarth in the likeness of a man riding on a seahorse, just as he is represented on coins of Tyre. In like manner, the Greeks portrayed the sea goddess Melecertes, whose name is only a slightly altered form of Melkarth, riding on a dolphin or stretched on the beast's back. Evidence of a custom of burning a god or goddess at Carthage. The firewalker Castabala, the Carthaginian king Hamilcar, sacrificed himself in the fire. At Carthage, the greatest of the Tyrian colonies, a reminiscence of the custom of burning a deity in effigy seems to linger in the story of that Dido, or Eliza, the foundress and queen of the city, stabbed herself to death upon a pyre, or leaped from her palace into the blazing pile to escape the fond importunities of one lover, or in despair at the cruel desertion of another. We are told that Dido was worshipped as a goddess at Carthage so long as the country maintained its independence. Her temple stood in the center of the city, shaded by a grove of solemn yews and firs. The two apparently contradictory views of her character as a queen and a goddess may be reconciled if we suppose that she was both the one and the other, that in fact the Queen of Carthage in early days, like the Queen of Egypt down to historical times, was regarded as divine, and had, like human deities elsewhere, to die a violent death either at the end of a fixed period or whenever her body and mental powers began to fail. In later ages, the stern old custom might be softened down into a pretense by substituting an effigy for the queen, or by allowing her to pass through the fire unscathed. A similar modification of the ancient rule appears to have been allowed at Tyre itself, the mother city of Carthage. We have seen reason to think that the kings of Tyre, from whom Dido was descended, claimed to impersonate the god Melkarth, and that the deity was burned either in effigy or in the person of a man at an annual festival. Now, in the same chapter in which Ezekiel charges the king of Tyre with claiming to be a god, the prophet describes him as walking up and down amidst the stones of fire. The description becomes at once intelligible if we suppose that in latter times the king of Tyre compounded for being burnt in the fire by walking up and down on hot stones, thereby saving his life at the expense perhaps of a few blisters on his feet. It is possible that when all went well with the Commonwealth, children whom strict law doomed to the furnace of Moloch may have been mercifully allowed to escape on condition of running the fiery gauntlet. At all events, a religious rite of this sort has been and is still practiced in many parts of the world. The performers solemnly pace through a furnace of heated stones or glowing wood ashes in the presence of a multitude of spectators. Examples of the custom have been adduced in another part of this work. Here I will cite only one. At Castabala, in southern Cappadocia, there was worshipped an Asiatic goddess whom the Greeks called the Persian Artemis. Her priestesses used to walk barefoot over a fire of charcoal without sustaining any injury. That this rite was a substitute for burning human beings alive or dead is suggested by the tradition which placed the adventure of Orestes and the Tauric Artemis at Castabala. For the men or women sacrificed to the Tauric Artemis were first put to the sword and then burned in a pit of sacred fire. Among the Carthaginians, another trace of such a practice may perhaps be detected in the story that at the desperate battle of Immerse, fought from dawn of day till late in the evening, the Carthaginian king Hamilcar remained in the camp and kept sacrificing holocausts of victims on a huge pyre. But when he saw his army giving way before the Greeks, he flung himself into the flames and was burned to death. Afterwards his countrymen sacrificed to him and erected a great monument in his honour at Carthage, while lesser monuments were reared to his memory in all the Punic colonies. In public emergencies which called for extraordinary measures, a king of Carthage may well have felt bound to honour to sacrifice himself in the old way for the good of his country. That the Carthaginians regarded the death of Hamilcar as an act of heroism and not as a mere suicide of despair is proved by the posthumous honours they paid him. The death of Hercules, a Greek version of the burning of Melkarth. The foregoing evidence, taken altogether, raises a strong presumption, though it cannot be said to amount to a proof, that a practice of burning a deity, and especially Melkarth, in effigy or in the person of a human representative, was observed at an annual festival in Tyre and its colonies. We can thus understand how Hercules, in so far as he represented the Tyrian god, was believed to have perished by a voluntary death on a pyre. For in many a beach and headland of the Aegean, where the Phoenicians had their trading factories, the Greeks may have watched the balefires of Melkarth blazing in the darkness of night, and have learned with wonder that the strange foreign folk were burning their god. In this way, the legend of the voyages of Hercules and his death in the flames may be supposed to have originated. Yet with the legend the Greeks borrowed the custom of burning their god, for at the festivals of Hercules a pyre used to be kindled in memory of the hero's fiery death at Mount Noeta. We may surmise, though we are not expressly told, that an effigy of Hercules was regularly burned on the fire. End of Section 6. Section 7. Chapter 6. The Burning of Sandan, Part 1. Part 1. The Ball of Tarsus. The Tyrian Melkarth in Cyprus, the lion-slaying god. In Cyprus, the Tyrian Melkarth was worshipped side by side with Adonis at Attis, and Phoenician inscriptions prove that he was revered also at Idalium and Larnax, Lepethus. At the last of these places, He seems to have been regarded by the Greeks as a marine deity and identified with Poseidon. A remarkable statue found at Attis may represent Melkarth in the character of the Lion Slayer, a character which the Greeks bestowed on Hercules. The statue in question is of colossal size and exhibits a thick-set, muscular, hirsute deity of almost bestial aspect, with goggle eyes, huge ears, and a pair of stumpy horns on the top of his head. His beard is square and curly. His hair falls in 3 pigtails on his shoulders. His brawny arms appear to be tattooed. A lion's skin clasped by a buckle is knotted round his loins, and he holds the skin of a lioness in front of him, grasping a hind paw with each hand, while the head of the beast, which is missing, hung down between his legs. A fountain must have issued from the jaws of the lioness, for a rectangular hole, where the beast's head should be, communicates by a channel with another hole in the back of the statue. Greek artists working on this type or a similar barbarous model produced the refined type of the Grecian Hercules with a lion's scalp thrown like a cowl over his head. Statues of him have been found in Cyprus, which represent intermediate stages of this artistic evolution, but there is no proof that in Cyprus the Tyrian Melkarth was burnt, either in effigy or in the person of a human representative. The Bough of Tarsus, an oriental god of corn and grapes. On the other hand, there is clear evidence of the observance of such a custom in Cilicia, the country which lies across the sea from Cyprus, and from which the worship of Adonis, according to tradition, was derived. Whether the Phoenicians ever colonized Cilicia or not is doubtful, but at all events the natives of the country, down to late times, worshipped a male deity who, in spite of a superficial assimilation of a fashionable Greek god, appears to have been an Oriental by birth and character. He had his principal seat at Tarsus, in a plain of luxuriant fertility and almost tropical climate, tempered by breezes from the snowy range of Tarsus on the north and from the sea on the south. Though Tarsus boasted of a school of Greek philosophy which at the beginning of our era surpassed those of Athens and Alexandria, the city apparently remained in manners and spirits essentially oriental. The women went about the streets muffled up to the eyes in Eastern fashion, and Dio Chrysostom reproaches the natives with resembling the most dissolute of the Phoenicians rather than the Greeks, whose civilization they aped. On the coins of the city, they simulated their native deity to Zeus by representing him seated on a throne, the upper part of his body bare, the lower limbs draped in a flowing robe, while in one hand he holds a scepter, which is topped sometimes with an eagle, but often with a lotus flower. Yet his foreign nature is indicated both by his name and his attributes. For in Aramaic inscriptions on the coins, he bears the name of the Bough of Tarsus, and in one hand he grasps an ear of corn and a bunch of grapes. These attributes clearly mark him out as a god of fertility in general, who conferred on his worshippers the 2 things which they prize above all other gifts of nature, the corn and the wine. He was probably therefore a Semitic, or at all events an Oriental, rather than a Greek deity. For while the Semite cast all his gods more or less in the same mould and expected them all to render him nearly the same services, the Greek, with his keener intelligence and more pictorial imagination, invested his deities with individual characteristics, allotting to each of them his or her separate function in the divine economy of the world. Thus he assigned the production of the corn to Demeter, and that of the grapes to Dionysus. He was not so unreasonable as to demand both from the same hard-working deity. Part 2. The God of a Breeze. The Bough of Tarsus has his counterpart at a breeze. In Cappadocia, the pass of the Cilician Gates. Now the suspicion that the Bough of Tarsus, for all his posing in the attitude of Zeus, was really an Oriental, is confirmed by a remarkable rock-hewn monument which is to be seen at a breeze in southern Cappadocia. Though the place is distant little more than 50 miles from Tarsus as the crow flies, yet the journey on horseback occupies 5 days, for the great barrier of the Tarsus mountains rises like a wall between. The road runs through the famous pass of the Cilician Gates, and the scenery throughout is of the greatest alpine character. On all sides the mountains tower skyward, their peaks sheeted in a dazzling pall of snow, their lower slopes veiled in an almost inky blackness of dense pine forests, torn here and there by impassable ravines, or broken into prodigious precipices of red and grey rock which border the narrow valley for miles. The magnificence of the landscape is enhanced by the exhilarating influence of the brisk mountain air, all the more by contrast with the sultry heat of the plain of Tarsus which the travellers left behind. When he emerges from the defile on a wide open tableland of Anatolia, he feels that, in a sense, he has passed out of Asia, and that the high road to Europe lies straight before him. The great mountains on which he now looks back form for centuries the boundary between the Christian West and the Mohammedan East. On the southern side by the domain of the Caliphs, on the northern side the Byzantine Empire. The Tarsus was the dam that long repelled the tide of Arab invasions, and though year by year the wave broke through the pass of the Cilician gates and carried havoc and devastation through the tableland, the refluent waters always retired to the lower level of the Cilician plains. A line of beacon lights stretching from the Tarsus to Constantinople flashed to the Byzantine capital tidings of the approach of the Muslim invaders. The rock sculptures at Attis represent the god of corn and grapes, adorned by his worshipper, a priest or king. The village of Immerse is charmingly situated at the northern foot of the Tarsus, some 6 or 7 miles south of the town of Erekli, the ancient Sybistra. From the town to the village, the path goes through a richly cultivated district of wheat and vines, along green lanes more lovely than those of Devonshire, lined by thick hedges and rows of willow, poplar, hazel, hawthorn, and huge old walnut trees, where in early summer the nightingales warble on every side. Immerse itself is embowered in the verdure of orchards, walnuts, and vines. It stands at the mouth of a deep ravine, enclosed by great precipices of red rock. From the western of these crevices, a river clear as crystal, but of a deep blue tint, bursts in a powerful jet, and being reinforced by a multitude of springs, becomes at once a raging impassable torrent, foaming and leaping with a roar of waters over the rocks in its bed. A little way from the source, a branch of the main stream flows in a deep narrow channel along the foot of a reddish weather-stained rock which rises sheer from the water. On its face, which has been smoothed to receive them, are the sculptures. They consist of 2 colossal figures representing a god adorned by his worshipper. The deity, some 14 feet high, is a bearded male figure, wearing on his head a high-pointed cap adorned with several pairs of horns, and plainly clad in a short tunic which does not reach his knees, as drawn in at the waist by a belt. His legs and arms are bare. The wrists are encircled by bangles or bracelets. His feet are shod in high boots with turned-up toes. In his right hand he holds a vine branch laden with clusters of grapes, and in his raised left hand he grasps a bunch of bearded wheat, such as is still grown in Cappadocia. The ears of corn project above his fingers, while the long stalks hang down to his feet. In front of him stands a lesser figure, some 8 feet high. He is clearly a priest or king, more probably perhaps both in one. His rich vestments contrast with the simple costume of the god. On his head he wears a round but unpointed cap, encircled by flat bands and ornamented in front with a rosette or bunch of jewels, such as still worn by Eastern princes. He is draped from the neck to the ankles in a long robe heavily fringed at the bottom, over which is thrown a shawl or mantle secured at the breast by a clasp of precious stones. Both robe and shawl are elaborately carved with patterns in imitation of embroidery. A heavy necklace of rings or beads encircles the neck. A bracelet or bangle clasps the one wrist that is visible. The feet are shod in boots like those of the god. One or perhaps both hands are raised in the act of adoration. The large aquiline nose, like the beak of a hawk, is a conspicuous feature in the face both of the god and of his worshipper. The hair and beard of both are thick and curly. The fertility of a breeze contrasted with the desolation of the surrounding country. The situation of this remarkable monument resembles that of Afaka on the Lebanon, for in both places we see a noble river issuing abruptly from the rock to spread fertility through the rich vale below. Nowhere perhaps could man more appropriately revere those great powers of nature to whose favour he ascribes the fruitfulness of the earth, and through it the life of animate creation. With its cool bracing air, its massive verdure, its magnificent stream of pure ice-cold water, so grateful in the burning heat of summer, and its wide stretch of fertile land, the valley may well have been the residence of an ancient prince or high priest, who desired to testify by this monument his devotion and gratitude to the god. The seat of this royal or priestly potentate may have been at Sibistra, the modern Erekli, now a decayed and miserable place, straggling amid orchards and gardens full of luxuriant groves of walnut, poplar, willow, mulberry, and oak. The place is a paradise of birds. Here the thrush and the nightingale sing full-throated. The hoopoe waves his crested topknot. The bright-hued woodpeckers flit from bough to bough, and the swift darts screaming by hundreds through the air. Yet a little way off, beyond the beneficent influence of the springs and streams, all is desolation. In summer, an arid waste broken by great marshes and wide patches of salt. In winter, a broad sheet of stagnant water, which, as it dries up with the growing heat of the sun, exhales a poisonous malaria. To the west, as far as the eye can see, stretches the endless expanse of the dreary Lycaonian plain, barren, treeless, and solitary till it fades into the blue distance, or is bounded afar off by abrupt ranges of jagged volcanic mountains, on which, in sunshiny weather, the shadows of the clouds rest, purple and soft as velvet. No wonder that the smiling luxuriance of the one landscape, sharply contrasting with the bleak stability of the other, should have rendered it, in the eyes of primitive man, a veritable garden of God. The Horned God. Among the attributes which mark out the deity of a breeze as a power of fertility, the horns on his cap should not be overlooked. They are probably the horns of a bull. For to primitive cattle breeders, the bull is the most natural emblem of generative force. At Carchemish, the great Hittite capital on the Euphrates, a relief has been discovered which represents a god or a priest clad in a rich robe, and wearing on his head a tall, horned cap surmounted by a disc. Sculptures found at the palace of Euriak in northwestern Cappadocia prove that the Hittites worshipped the bull and sacrificed rams to it. Similarly, the Greeks conceived the divine god Dionysus in the form of a bull. Part 3. Sandan of Tarsus. The god of a breeze, a Hittite deity. That the god of a breeze, with the grapes and corn in his hands, is identical with the Bough of Tarsus, who bears the same emblems, may be taken as certain. But what was his name, and who were his worshippers? The Greeks apparently called him Hercules. At least in Byzantine times, the neighbouring town of Sibistra adopted the name of Heraclea, which seems to show that Hercules was deemed the principal deity of the place. Yet the style and costume of the figures at a breeze prove unquestionably that the god was an Oriental. If any confirmation of this view were needed, it is furnished by the inscriptions carved on the rock beside the sculptures, for these inscriptions are composed in the peculiar system of hieroglyphics now known as Hittite. It follows, therefore, that the deity worshipped at Tarsus in a breeze was a god of the Hittites, that ancient and little-known people who occupied the centre of Asia Minor, invented a system of writing and extended their influence, if not their dominion, at one time from the Euphrates to the Aegean, from the lofty and arid tablelands of the interior, a prolongation of the great plateau of Central Asia, with a climate ranging from the most burning heat in summer to the most piercing cold in winter. These hardy highlanders seem to have swept down through the mountain passes and established themselves at a very early date in the rich southern lowlands of Syria and Cilicia. The language and race are still under discussion, but a great preponderance of opinion appears to declare that neither the one nor the other was Semitic. The burning of Sandan or Hercules at Tarsus. In the inscription attached to the colossal figure of the god at Attis, 2 scholars have professed to read the name of Sandan or Sanda. Be that as it may, there are independent grounds for thinking that Sandan, Sandon, or Sandis may have been the name of the Cappadocian and Cilician god of fertility, for the god of Attis in Cappadocia appears, as we saw, to have been identified by the Greeks with Hercules, and we are told that a Cappadocian and Cilician name of Hercules was Sandan or Sandis. Now this Sandan or Hercules is said to have founded Tarsus, and the people of the city commemorated him at an annual, or at all events, periodical festival by erecting a fine pyre in his honor. Apparently, at this festival, as at the festival of Melkarth, the god was burned in effigy on his own pyre, for coins of Tarsus often exhibit the pyre as a conical structure resting on a garlanded altar or basis, with a figure of Sandan himself in the midst of it, while an eagle with spread wings perches on the top of the pyre, as if about to bear the soul of the burning god in the pillar of smoke and fire to heaven. In like manner, when a Roman emperor died leaving a son to succeed him on the throne, a waxen effigy was made in the likeness of the deceased and burned on a huge pyramidal pyre, which was reared upon a square basis of wood, and from the summit of the blazing pile an eagle was released for the purpose of carrying to heaven the soul of the dead and deified emperor. The Romans may have borrowed from the East a grandiose custom which savours of oriental adulation rather than of Roman simplicity. Sandan of Tarsus, an Asiatic god, with the symbols of the lion and the double axe. The type of Sandan or Hercules, as he is portrayed on the coins of Tarsus, is that of an Asiatic deity standing on a lion. It is thus that he is represented on the pyre, and it is thus that he appears as a separate figure without the pyre. From these representations, we can form a fairly accurate conception of the form and attributes of the god. They exhibit him as a bearded man standing on a horned and often winged lion. Upon his head he wears a high pointed cap or mitra, and he is clad sometimes in a long robe, sometimes in a short tunic. On at least one coin, his feet are shod in high boots with flaps. At his side or over his shoulder are slung a sword, a bow case, and a quiver, sometimes only 1 or 2 of them. His right hand is raised and sometimes holds a flower. His left hand grasps a double-headed axe, and sometimes a wreath, either in addition to the axe or instead of it, but the double-headed axe is one of Sandan's most constant attributes. 4. The gods of Bough. Bough, the ancient capital of a Hittite kingdom in Cappadocia. Now, a deity of almost precisely the same type figures prominently in the celebrated group of Hittite sculptures which is carved on the rocks of Bough in northwestern Cappadocia. The village of Bough, that is, the village of the defile, stands at the mouth of a deep, narrow and picturesque gorge in a wild upland valley, shut in by rugged mountains of grey limestone. The houses are built on the lower slopes of the hills, and a stream issuing from the gorge flows past them to join the Attis, which is distant about 10 hours' journey to the west. Immediately above the modern village, a great ancient city, enclosed by massive fortification walls, rose on the rough broken ground of the mountainside, culminating in 2 citadels perched on the tops of precipitous crags. The walls are still standing, in many places to a height of 12 feet or more. They are about 14 feet thick, and consist of an outer and inner facing built of large blocks, with a core of rubble between them. On the outer side they are strengthened at intervals of about 100 feet by projecting towers or buttresses, which seem designed rather as architectural supports than as military defences. The masonry, composed of large stones, laid in roughly parallel courses, resembles in style that of the walls of Mycenae, with which it may be contemporary, and the celebrated Lion Gate in Mycenae has its counterpart in the southern gate of Bough, which is flanked by a pair of colossal stone lions, executed in the best style of Hittite art. The eastern gate is adorned on its inner side with a figure of a Hittite warrior or Amazon carved in high relief. A dense undergrowth of stunted oak coppice now covers much of the site. The ruins of a large palace or temple, built of enormous blocks of stone, occupy a terrace in a commanding situation within the circuit of the walls. This vast city, some 4 or 5 miles in circumference, appears to have been the ancient Pteria, which Croesus, king of Lydia, captured in his war with Cyrus. It was probably the capital of a powerful Hittite empire before the Phrygians made their way from Europe into the interior of Asia Minor and established a rival state to the west of the Attis. The sanctuary in the rock sculptures in the outer sanctuary of Bough represent 2 processions meeting the central figures. From the village of Bough, a steep and rugged path leads uphill to a sanctuary distant about 1.5 miles to the east. Here among the grey limestone cliffs is a spacious natural chamber or hall of roughly a oblong shape, roofed only by the sky and enclosed on 3 sides by high rocks. One of the short sides is open, and through it you look out on the broken slopes beyond and the more distant mountains, which make a graceful picture set in a massive frame. The length of the chamber is about 100 feet. Its breadth varies from 25 to 50 feet. A nearly level sward forms the floor. On the right-hand side, as you face inward, a narrow opening in the rocks leads into another, but much smaller chamber, or rather corridor, which would seem to have been the inner sanctuary or Holy of Holies. It is a romantic spot, where the deep shadows of the rocks are relieved by the bright foliage of walnut trees, and by the sight of the sky and clouds overhead. On the rock walls of both chambers are carved the famous bas-reliefs. In the outer sanctuary, these reliefs represent 2 great processions which defile along the 2 long sides of the chamber and meet face to face on a short wall at the inner end. The figures on the left-hand wall are for the most part men clad in the characteristic Hittite costume, which consists of a high pointed cap, shoes with turned-up toes, and a tunic drawn in at the waist and falling short of the knees. The figures on the right-hand wall are women wearing tall, square, flat-topped bonnets with ribbed sides. Their long dresses fall in perpendicular folds to their feet, which are shortened shoes like those of the men. On the short wall, where the processions meet, the greater size of the central figures as well as their postures and attributes mark them out as divine. At the head of the male procession marches or is carried a bearded deity clad in the ordinary Hittite costume of tall pointed cap, short tunic, and turn-up shoes. But his feet rest on the bowed heads of 2 men. In his right hand he holds on his shoulder a mace or truncheon topped with a knob, while his extended left hand grasps a symbol, which apparently consists of a trident surmounted by an oval with a crossbar. Behind him follows a similar, though somewhat smaller, figure of a man, or perhaps rather of a god, carrying a mace or truncheon over his shoulder in his right hand, while with his left he holds aloft a long sword with a flat hilt. His feet rest not on 2 men, but on 2 flat-topped pinnacles, which perhaps represent mountains. At the head of the female procession, and facing the great god who is borne on the 2 men, stands a goddess on a lioness or panther. Her costume does not differ from that of the women, but her hair hangs down in a long plait behind. In her extended right hand, she holds out an emblem to touch that of the god. The shape and meaning of her emblem are obscure. It consists of a stem with 2 pairs of protuberances, perhaps leaves or branches, one above the other, the whole being surmounted like the emblem of the god by an oval with a crossbar. Out of the outstretched arms of the 2 deities appear the front parts of 2 animals, which have been usually interpreted as bulls, but are rather goats. Each of them wears on its head a high conical Hittite cap, and its body is concealed by that of the deity. Immediately behind the goddess marches a smaller and apparently youthful male figure, standing like her upon a lioness or panther. He is beardless and wears a Hittite dress of high pointed cap, short tunic, and shoes with turned-up toes. A crescent-hilted sword is girt at his side. In his left hand he holds a double-headed axe, and his right hand a staff topped by an armor stole with the symbol of the cross-barred oval instead of a head. Behind him follow two women, or other perhaps goddesses, resembling the goddess at the head of the procession, but with different emblems and standing not on a lioness, but on a single two-headed eagle with outspread wings. The rock sculptures in the inner sanctuary at Bough, the lion god, the god protecting his priest, are the representations of the priest of Bough and Ayuk. The entrance to the smaller chamber is guarded on either side by the figure of a winged monster carved on the rock. The bodies of both figures are human, but one of them has the head of a dog, the other the head of a lion. In the inner sanctuary, to which this monster-guarded passage leads, the walls are also carved in relief. On one side we see a procession of 12 men in Hittite costume marching with curved swords in their right hands. On the opposite wall is a colossal erect figure of a deity with a human head and a body curiously composed of 4 lions, 2 above and 2 below, and that is standing on their heads. The god wears the high conical Hittite hat. His face is youthful and beardless, like that of the male figure standing on the lioness in the large chamber, and the ear turned to the spectators pierced with a ring. From the knees downwards the legs, curiously enough, are replaced by a device which has been interpreted as the tapering point of a great dagger or dirk with a midrib. To the right of this deity, a square panel cut in the face of the rock exhibits a group of 2 figures in relief. The larger of the 2 figures closely resembles the youth on the lioness in the outer sanctuary. His chin is beardless, he wears the same high pointed cap, the same short tunic, the same turned-up shoes, the same crescent-hilted sword, and he carries a similar armless stole in his right hand. But his left arm encircles the neck of the smaller figure, whom he seems to clasp to his side in an attitude of protection. The smaller figure thus embraced by the god is clearly a priest or priestly king. His face is beardless. He wears a skull cap and a long mantle reaching to his feet with a sort of chasuble thrown over it. The crescent-shaped hilt of a sword projects from under his mantle. The wrist on his right arm is clasped by the god's left hand. In his left hand, the priest holds a crook or pastoral staff, which ends below in a curl. Both the priest and his protector are facing towards the lion god. In an upper corner of the panel behind them is a divine emblem composed of a winged disc, resting on what look like 2 ionic columns, while between them appears 3 symbols of doubtful significance. The figure of the priest or king in this costume, although not in this attitude, is a familiar one, for it occurs twice in the outer sanctuary and is repeated twice at the great Hittite palace of Ayuk, distant about 4.5 hours' ride to the northeast of Bough. In the outer sanctuary at Bough, we see the priest marching in the procession of the men, and holding in one hand his curled staff, or litus, and in the other a symbol like that of the goddess on the lioness. Above his head appears a winged disc without the other attributes. Moreover, he occupies a conspicuous place by himself on the right-hand wall of the outer sanctuary, quite apart from the 2 processions, and carved on a larger scale than any of the other figures in them. Here he stands on 2 heaps, perhaps intended to represent mountains, and he carries in his right hand the emblem of the winged disc supported on 2 ionic columns with the other symbols between them, except that the central symbol is replaced by a masculine figure wearing a pointed cap and a long robe decorated with a dog-tooth pattern. On one of the reliefs at the palace of Ayuk, we see the priest with his characteristic dress and staff followed by a priestess, each of them with a hand raised as if in adoration. They are approaching the image of a bull which stands on a high pedestal with an altar before it. Behind them a priest leads a flock of rams to the sacrifice. On another relief at Ayuk, the priest, similarly attired and followed by a priestess, is approaching a seated goddess and apparently pouring a libation at her feet. Both these scenes doubtless represent acts of worship, paid in the one case to a goddess, in the other to a bull. The two deities at the head of the processions at Bogha's Kui appear to be the great Asiatic goddess and her consort, the Hittite god of the thundering sky, Jupiter Dolus. We have still to inquire into the meaning of the rock carvings at Bogha's Kui. What are these processions which are meeting? Who are the personages represented, and what are they doing? Some have thought that the scene is historical and commemorates a great event, such as a treaty of peace between two peoples or the marriage of a king's son to a king's daughter. But to this view, it has been rightly objected that the attributes of the principal figures prove them to be divinely or priestly, and that the scene is therefore religious or mythical rather than historical. With regard to the two personages who head the processions and hold out their symbols to each other, the most probable opinion appears to be that they stand for the great Asiatic goddess of fertility and her consort, by whatever names these deities were known. For under diverse names, a similar divine couple appears to have been worshipped with similar rites all over Western Asia. The bearded god who, grasping a trident in his extended left hand, heads the procession of male figures is probably the father deity, the great Hittite god of the thundering sky, whose emblems were the thunderbolt and the bull, for the trident which he carries may reasonably be interpreted as a thunderbolt. The deity is represented in similar form on two stone monuments of Hittite art which were found at Zenjuli in northern Syria and at Babylon respectively. On both we see a bearded male god wearing the usual Hittite costume of tall cap, short tunic and shoes turned up at the toes. A crescent-hilted sword is girt at his side. His hands are raised. In his right he holds a single-headed axe or hammer. In the left a trident of wavy lines, which is thought to stand for forked lightning or a bundle of thunderbolts. On the Babylonian slab, which bears a long Hittite inscription, the god's cap is ornamented with a pair of horns. The horns on the cap are probably those of a bull, or on another Hittite monument, on the Euphrates, there is carved a deity in the usual Hittite costume standing on a bull, grasping a trident or thunderbolt in his left hand, while facing him stands a priest clad in a long robe, holding a crook or curled staff in one hand and pouring a libation with the other. The Hittite thunder god is also known to us from a treaty of alliance which, about the year 1290 BC, was contracted between Hattusil, king of the Hittites, and Ramesses II, king of Egypt. By a singular piece of good fortune, we possess copies of this treaty both in the Hittite and in the Egyptian language. The Hittite copy was found some years ago inscribed in cuneiform characters on a clay tablet at Bogha's Kui. Two copies of the treaty in the Egyptian language are engraved on the walls of temples at Thebes. From the Egyptian copies, which have been read and translated, we gather that the thunder god was a principal deity of the Hittites, and that the two Hittite seals which were appended to the treaty exhibited the king embraced by the thunder god and the queen embraced by the sun goddess of Arena. This Hittite divinity of the thundering sky appears to have long survived at Dodich in Commagene, for in later Roman art he reappears under the title of Jupiter Dolicinus, wearing a Phrygian cap, standing on a bull, and wielding a double axe in one hand and a thunderbolt in the other. In this form his worship was transported from his native Syrian home by soldiers and slaves, till it spread over a large part of the Roman Empire, especially on the frontiers, where it flourished in the camps of the legions. The combinations of the bull with the thunderbolt as emblems of the deity suggest that the animal may have been chosen to represent the sky god for the sake not merely of its virility, but of its voice. For in the peal of thunder, primitive man may well have heard the bellowing of a celestial bull. The Mother Goddess. The goddess who at the head of the procession of women confronts the great sky god in the sanctuary of Bogha's Kui is generally recognized as the Divine Mother, the great Asiatic goddess of life and fertility. The tall flat-topped hat with perpendicular grooves which she wears, and the lioness or panther on which she stands, remind us of the turreted crown and lion-drawn car of Sabil, who was worshipped in the neighbouring land of Phrygia across the Hales. So as Attis, the great Syrian goddess of Hierapolis Bambais, was portrayed sitting on lions and wearing a tower on her head. At Babylon, an image of a goddess whom the Greeks called Rhea had the figures of two lions standing on her knees. The youth on the lioness, bearing the double axe of Boghaz Kui, may be the divine son and lover of the goddess. But in the rock-hewn sculptures of Boghaz Kui, who is a youth with a tall pointed cap and double axe who stands on a lioness or panther immediately behind the great goddess? His figure is all the more remarkable because he is the only male who interrupts the long procession of women. Probably he is at once the divine son and the divine lover of the goddess, for we shall find later on that in Phrygian mythology Attis united in himself both these characters. The lioness or panther on which he stands marks his affinity with the goddess, who is supported by a similar animal. It is natural that the lion goddess should have a lion son and a lion lover, for we may take it as probable that the oriental deities who were represented standing or sitting in human form on the backs of lions and other animals were originally indistinguishable from the beasts, and that the complete separation of the bestial from the human or divine shape was a consequence of that growth of knowledge and of power which led man in time to respect himself more and the brutes less. The hybrid gods of Egypt, with their human bodies and animal heads, form an intermediate stage in this evolution of anthropomorphic deities out of beasts. The mystery of the lion god. We may now perhaps hazard a conjecture as to the meaning of that strange colossal figure in the inner shrine at Boghaz Kui, with its human head and its body composed of lions. For it is to be observed that the head of the figure is youthful and beardless, and that it wears a tall pointed cap, thus representing in both respects the youth with the double-headed axe who stands on a lion in the outer sanctuary. We may suppose that the leonine figure in the inner shrine sets forth the true mystic, that is, the old savage nature of the god who in the outer shrine presented himself to his worshippers in the decent semblance of a man. To the chosen few who were allowed to pass the monster-guarded portal into the Holy of Holies, the awful secret may have been revealed that their god was a lion, or rather a lion man, a being in whom the bestial and human natures mysteriously coexisted. The reader may remember that on the rock beside this leonine divinity is carved a group which represents a god with his arm twined around the neck of his priest in an attitude of protection, holding one of the priest's hands in his own. Both figures are looking and stepping towards the lion monster, and the god is holding out his right hand as if pointing to it. The scene may represent the deity revealing the mystery to the priest, or preparing him to act his part in some solemn rite for which all his strength and courage will be needed. He seems to be leading his minister onward, comforting him with an assurance that no harm can come near him, while the divine arm is around him and the divine hand clasps his. Whither is he leading him? Perhaps to death. The deep shadows of the rocks which fall on the two figures in the gloomy chasm may be an emblem of darker shadows soon to fall on the priest. Yet still he grasps his pastoral staff and goes forward, as though he said, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadows of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." The processions at Boghaz Kui appear to represent the sacred marriage of the god and goddesses, traces of motherkin among the Hittites. If there is any truth in these guesses, for they are little more, the three principal figures in the processional scene at Boghaz Kui represent the Divine Father, the Divine Mother, and the Divine Son. But we have still to ask, what are they doing? That they are engaged in the performance of some religious rite seems certain, but what is it? We may conjecture that it is the rite of the sacred marriage, and that the scene is copied from a ceremony which was periodically performed in this very place by human representatives of the deities. Indeed, the solemn meeting of the male and female figures at the head of their respective processions obviously suggests a marriage, and has been so interpreted by scholars, who, however, regarded it as the historical wedding of a prince and princess instead of the mystic union of a god and goddess, overlooking or explaining away the symbols of divinity which accompany the principal personages. We may suppose that at Boghaz Kui, as in many other places in the interior of Asia Minor, the government was in the hands of a family who combined royal with priestly functions and personated the gods whose names they bore. Thus at Pessinus in Phrygia, as we shall see later on, the priest of Cybele bore the name of her consort Attis, and doubtless represented him in the ritual. If this was so at Boghaz Kui, we may surmise that the chief pontiff and his family annually celebrated the marriage of the divine powers of fertility, the father god and the mother goddess, for the purpose of ensuring the fruitfulness of the earth and the multiplication of men and beasts. The principal parts in the ceremony would naturally be played by the pontiff himself and his wife, unless indeed they preferred for good reasons to delegate the onerous duty to others. That such a delegation took place is perhaps suggested by the appearance of the pontiff himself in a subordinate place in the procession, as well as by his separate representation in another place, as if he were in the act of surveying the ceremony from a distance. The part of the divine son at the right would fitly devolve upon one of the high priest's own offspring, who may well have been numerous. For it is probable that here, as elsewhere in Asia Minor, the mother goddess was personated by a crowd of sacred harlots, with whom the spiritual ruler may have been required to consort in his character of incarnate deity. But if the personation of the Son of God at the right laid a heavy burden of suffering on the shoulders of the actor, it is possible that the representative of the deity may have been drawn, perhaps by lot, from among the numerous progeny of the consecrated courtesans, for these women, as incarnations of the mother goddess, were probably supposed to transmit to their offspring some portion of their own divinity. Be that as it may, if the three principal personages in the processional scene at Boghaz Kui are indeed the father, the mother, and the son, the remarkable position assigned to the third of them in the procession, where he walks behind his mother alone in the procession of women, appears to indicate that he was supposed to be more closely akin to her than to his father. From this again we may conjecturally infer that mother-kin, rather than father-kin, was a rule which regulated descent among the Hittites. The conjecture derives some support from Hittite archives, for the names of the great queen and the queen mother are mentioned along with that of the king in state documents. The other personages who figure in the procession may represent human beings masquerading in the costumes and with the attributes of deities. Such, for example, are the two female figures who stand on a double-headed eagle, the two male figures stepping on what seem to be two mountains, and the two winged beings in the procession of men, one of whom may be the moon god, for he wears a crescent on his head. End of Section 7. Section 8. Chapter 6. The Burning of Sandan, Part 2. Part 5. Sandan and Baugh at Tarsus. Sandan at Tarsus appears to be a son of Baugh, as Hercules was a son of Zeus. Whatever may be thought of these speculations, one thing seems fairly clear and certain. The figure which I have called the Divine Son at Boghaz Kui is identical with the god Sandan, who appears on the pyre at Tarsus. In both personages, the costume, the attributes, the attitude are the same. Both represent a man clad in a short tunic with a tall pointed cap on his head, a sword at his side, a double-headed axe in his hand, and a lion or panther under his feet. Accordingly, if we are right to identify him as the Divine Son at Boghaz Kui, we may conjecture that under the name of Sandan he bore the same character at Tarsus. The conjecture squares perfectly with the title of Hercules, which the Greeks bestowed on Sandan, for Hercules was the son of Zeus, the great father god. Moreover, we have seen that the Bough of Tarsus, with the grapes and the corn in his hand, was assimilated to Zeus. Thus it would appear that at Tarsus, as at Logos Gui, there was a pair of deities, a divine father and a divine son, whom the Greeks identified with Zeus and Hercules respectively. If the Bough of Tarsus was a god of fertility, as his attributes clearly imply, his identification with Zeus would be natural, since it was Zeus who, in the belief of the Greeks, sent the fertilizing rain from heaven, and the identification of Sandan with Hercules would be equally natural, since the lion and the death on the pyre were features common to both. Our conclusion, then, is that it was the divine son, the lion god, who was burned in effigy, or in the person of a human representative at Tarsus, and perhaps at Logos Gui. Semitic parallels suggest that the victim who played the part of the Son of God in the fiery furnace ought in strictness to be the king's son, but no doubt in latter times an effigy would be substituted for the man. Part 6. Priestly Kings of Olba. Priests of Sandan, Hercules of Tarsus, king of Cilicia, related to Sandan. Unfortunately, we know next to nothing of the kings and priests of Tarsus. In Greek times we hear of an Epicurean philosopher of the city, Lysaeus by name, who was elected by his fellow citizens to the office of crown wearer, that is, to the priesthood of Hercules. Once raised to that dignity, he would not lay it down again, but played the part of tyrant, wearing a white robe edged with purple, a costly cloak, white shoes, and a golden wreath of laurel. He trucked to the mob by distributing among them the property of the wealthy, while he put to death such as refused to open their money bags to him. The high priest of the Syrian goddess at Hierapolis held office for a year, and wore a purple robe and a golden tiara. Lucian, D. de Syria 42. We may conjecture that the priesthood of Hercules at Tarsus was in latter times at least an annual office. Though we cannot distinguish in this account between the legal and the illegal exercise of authority, yet we may safely infer that the priesthood of Hercules, that is, of Sandan, at Tarsus continued down to late times to be an office of great dignity and power, not unworthy to be held in earlier times by the kings themselves. Scanty as is our information as to the kings of Cilicia, we hear of two whose names appear to indicate that they stood in some special relation to the divine Sandan. One of them was Sozuari, lord of Kundi and Sizu, which have been identified with Achael and Sis in Cilicia. The other was Sanda Sanme, who gave his daughter in marriage to Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria. It would be in accordance with the analogy of the kings of Tarsus, formerly held the priesthood of Sandan and claimed to represent him in their own person. Priestly kings of Olba who bore the names of Teucer and Ajax. The Teucerids of Salamis and Cyprus. Burnt sacrifice of human victims at Salamis and traces of a similar custom elsewhere. Burnt sacrifice of doves to Adonis. We know that the whole of western or mountainous Cilicia was ruled by kings who combined the regal office with the priesthood of Zeus, or rather of a native deity whom, like the Bough of Tarsus, the Greeks assimilated to their own Zeus. These priestly potentates had their seat at Olba, and most of them bore the name either of Teucer or of Ajax. But we may suspect that these appellations are merely Greek distortions of native Cilician names. Teucer, Teucros, may be a corruption of Tark, Trok, Tarku, or Trogo, all of which occur in the names of Cilician priests and kings. At all events, it is worthy of notice that one, if not two of these priestly Teucers had a father called Tarchores, and that in a long list of priests who served Zeus at the Corycian cave, not many miles from Olba, the names Tarchores, Tarchumbios, Tarkimos, Trocorbesis, and Trocombiguremis, besides many other obviously native names, occur side by side with Teucer and other purely Greek appellations. In like manner, the Tergrids, who traced their descent from Zeus and reigned at Salamis in Cyprus, may well have been a native dynasty who concocted a Greek pedigree for themselves in the days when Greek civilization was fashionable. The legend which attributed the foundation of the Cyprian Salamis to Teucer, son of Telamon, appears to be late and unknown to Homer. Moreover, a cruel form of human sacrifice, which was practiced in the city down to historical times, savours rather of Oriental barbarity than of Greek humanity. Led or driven by the youths, a man ran thrice round the altar. Then the priest stabbed him in the throat with a spear and burned his body whole on a heaped-up pyre. The sacrifice was offered in the month of Aphrodite to Diomede, who along with Agrolis, daughter of Cecrops, had a temple at Salamis. A temple of Athena stood within the same sacred enclosure. It is said that in olden times the sacrifice was offered to Agrolis and not to Diomede. According to another account, it was instituted by Teucer in honor of Zeus. However that may have been, the barbarous custom lasted down to the reign of Hadrian, when Diphilius, king of Cyprus, abolished or rather mitigated it by substituting the sacrifice of an ox for that of a man. On the hypothesis here suggested, we must suppose that these Greek names of divine or heroic figures at the Cyprian Salamis covered more or less similar figures of the Asiatic pantheon. And in the Salaminian burnt sacrifice of a man, we may perhaps detect the original form of the ceremony, which in historical times appears to have been performed upon an image of Sandan or Hercules at Tarsus. When an ox was sacrificed instead of a man, the old sacrificial rites would naturally continue to be observed in all other respects exactly as before. The animal would be led thrice around the altar, stabbed with a spear, and burnt on a pyre. Now at the Syrian Hierapolis, the greatest festival of the year bore the name of the pyre, or the torch. It was held at the beginning of spring. Great trees were then cut down and planted in the court of the temple. Sheep, goats, birds, and other creatures were hung upon them. Sacrificial victims were led round. Then fire was set to the whole, and everything was consumed in the flames. Perhaps here also the burning of animals was a substitute for the burning of men. When the practice of human sacrifice becomes too revolting to humanity to be tolerated, its abolition is commonly effected by substituting either animals or images for living men or women. At Salamis certainly, and perhaps at Hierapolis, the substitutes were animals. At Tarsus, if I am right, they were images. In the connection, the statement of a Greek writer as to the worship of Adonis in Cyprus deserves attention. He says that as Adonis has been honoured by Aphrodite, the Cyprians, after his death, cast live doves on a pyre to him, and that the birds, flying away from the flames, fell into another pyre and were consumed. The statement seems to be a description of an actual custom of burning doves in sacrifice to Adonis. Such a mode of honouring him would be very remarkable, since doves were commonly sacred to his divine mistress Aphrodite or Astarte. For example, at the Syrian Hierapolis, one of the chief seats of her worship, these birds were so holy that they might not even be touched. If a man inadvertently touched a dove, he was unclean or tabooed for the rest of the day. Hence the birds, never being molested, were so tame that they lived with the people in their houses and calmly picked up their food fearlessly on the ground. Can the burning of the sacred bird of Aphrodite in the Cyprian worship of Adonis have been a substitute for the burning of a sacred man who personated the lover of the goddess? The priestly Tergrids of Bough perhaps personated a native god, Tark. If, as many scholars think, Tark or Tarku was the name, or part of the name, of a great Hittite deity, sometimes identified as the god of the sky and the lightning, we may conjecture that Tark or Tarku was a native name of the god of Bough, whom the Greeks called Zeus, and that the priestly kings who bore the name of Teucer represented the god Tark, or Tarku, in their own persons. This conjecture is confirmed by the observation that Olba, the ancient name of the city, is itself merely a Greek-sized form of Ura, the name which the place retains to this day. The situation of the town, moreover, speaks strongly in favour of the view that it was, from the beginning, an aboriginal settlement, though in after days, like so many other Asiatic cities, it took on a varnish of Greek culture, for it stood remote from the sea on a lofty and barren tableland with a rigorous winter climate in the highlands of Cilicia. Western or rugged Cilicia. Great indeed is the contrast between the bleak, windy uplands of western or rugged Cilicia, as the ancients called it, and the soft, luxuriant lowlands of eastern Cilicia, where winter is almost unknown and summer annually drives the population to seek in the cool air of the mountains a refuge from the intolerable heat and deadly fevers of the plains. In western Cilicia, on the other hand, a lofty tableland, ending in a high, sharp edge on the coast, rises steadily inland till it passes gradually into the chain of heights which divide it from the interior. Looked at from the sea, it resembles a great blue wave, swelling in one uniform sweep, till its crest breaks into foam in the distant snows of the Taurus. The surface of the tableland is almost everywhere rocky and overgrown, in the intervals in the rocks with dense, thorny, almost impenetrable scrub. Only here and there in a hollow or glen, the niggardly soil allows from a patch of cultivation, and here and there fine oaks and planes, towering over the brushwood, clothe with a richer foliage the depth of the valleys. None but wandering herdsmen, with their flocks, now maintain a precarious existence in this rocky wilderness. Yet the ruined towns which studded the country prove that dense population lived and throve there in antiquity, while numerous remains of wine presses and wine vats bear witness to the successful cultivation of the grape. The chief cause of the present desolation is a lack of water, for wells are few and brackish. Perennial streams hardly exist, and the ancient aqueducts, which once brought life and fertility to the land, have long been suffered to fall into disrepair. The Cilician Pirates. But for ages together, the ancient inhabitants of these uplands earned their bread by less reputable means than the toil of the husbandman and the vine-dresser. They were buccaneers and slavers, scouring the high seas with their galleys and retiring with their booty to the inaccessible fastness of their mountains. In the decline of Greek power all over the east, the pirate communities of Cilicia grew into a formal state, recruited by gangs of desperadoes and broken men who flocked to it from all sides. The holds of these robbers may still be seen perched on the brink of the profound ravines which cleave the tableland at frequent intervals. With their walls of massive masonry, their towers and battlements overhanging dizzy depths, they are admirably adapted to bid defiance in the pursuit of justice. In antiquity, the dark forests of cedar, which clothed much of the country and supplied the pirates with timber for their ships, must have rendered access to these fastnesses still more difficult. The great gorge of the Lammas River, which eats its way like a sheet of forked lightning into the heart of the mountains, is dotted every few miles with fortified towns, some of them still magnificent in their ruins. Dominating sheer cliffs high above the stream, they are now the haunt only of the ibex and the bear. Each of these communities has its own crest or badge, which may still be seen carved on the corners of the mouldering towers. No doubt, too, it blazoned the same crest on the hull, the sails, or the streamers of the galley which, manned with a crew of ruffians, it sent out to prey upon the rich merchantmen of the Golden Sea, as the corsairs called the highway of commerce between Crete and Africa. The deep gorges of rugged Cilicia. A staircase cut in the rock connects one of these ruined castles with the river in the glen, 1,000 feet below, but the steps are worn and dangerous, indeed impassable. You may go for miles along the edge of these stupendous cliffs before you find a way down. The paths keep on the heights, for in many of its reaches the gully affords no foothold even to the agile nomads who alone roam its solitudes. At evening the winding course of the river may be traced for a long distance by a mist which, as the heat of the day declines, rises like steam from the deep gorge and hangs suspended like a wavy line of fleecy cloud above it. But even more imposing than the ravine of the Lamas is a terrific gorge known as the Shaitan Tere, or Devil's Glen, near the Kurisian Cave. Prodigious walls of rock, glowing in the intense sunlight, black in the shadow, and spanned by a summer sky of the deepest blue, hemming the dry bed of a winter torrent, choked with rocks and dangled with thickets of evergreens, among which the oleanders with their slim stalks, delicate tapa leaves, and bunches of crimson blossom stand out conspicuous. The site and ruins of Olba, the temple of Olbian Zeus. The ruins of Olba, among the most extensive and remarkable in Asia Minor, were discovered in 1890 by Mr. J. Theodore Bent. But 3 years before, another English traveller had caught a distant view of its battlements and towers outlined against the sky like a city of enchantment or dreams. Standing at a height of nearly 6,000 feet above the sea, the upper town commands a free, if somewhat uniform, prospect for immense distances in all directions. The sea is just visible far away to the south. On these heights the winter is long and severe. Snow lies on the ground for months. No Greek would have chosen such a site for a city, so bleak and chill, so far from blue water, but it served well for a fastness of brigands. Deep gorges, one of them filled for miles of tombs, surrounded on all sides, rendering fortification walls superfluous. But a great square tower, 4 stories high, rises conspicuous on the hill, forming a landmark and earning for this upper town the native name of Jebel Hisar, or the mountain of the castle. The Greek inscription cut on the tower proves that it was built by Teucer, son of Tacores, one of the priestly potentates of Olba. Among the remains of the public buildings, the most notable are 40 tall Corinthian columns of the great temple of Olbian Zeus. Though coarse in style and corroded by long exposure to frost and snow, these massive pillars, towering above the ruins, produce an imposing effect. That the temple of which they form part belonged indeed to Olbian Zeus is shown by a Greek inscription found within the sacred area, which records that the penthouses on the inner side of the boundary wall were built by King Seleucus Nicator and repaired for Olbian Zeus by the great high priest Teucer, son of Xenophanes. About 200 yards from this great temple are standing 5 elegant granite columns of a small temple dedicated to the goddess Fortune. Further, the remains of 2 theatres and many other public buildings attest the former splendour of this mountain city. An arched colonnade, of which some Corinthian columns are standing, with their architraves, ran through the town. An ancient paved road, lined with tombs and ruins, leads downhill to a lower and smaller city 2 or 3 miles distant. It is this lower town which retains the ancient name of Ora. Here the principal ruins occupy an isolated fir-clad height bounded by 2 narrow ravines full of rock-cut tombs. Below the town the ravines unite to form a fine gorge, down which the old road passed seaward. Part 7. The God of the Kurisian Cave. Limestone caverns of western Cilicia. Nothing yet found at Olba throws light on the nature of the god who was worshipped there under the Greek name of Zeus. But at 2 places near the coast, distant only some 14 or 15 miles from Olba, a deity also called Zeus by the Greeks was revered in natural surroundings of a remarkable kind, which must have stood in close relation with the worship, and are therefore fitted to illustrate it. In both places the features of the landscape are of the same general cast, and at one of them the god was definitely identified with the Zeus of Olba. The country here consists of a tableland of calcareous rock, rent at intervals by those great chasms which are characteristic of the limestone formation. Similar fissures, with the accompaniment of streams or rivers which pour into them and vanish underground, are frequent in Greece, and may be observed in our own country near Ingleborough in Yorkshire. Fossil bones of extinct animals are often found embedded in the stalagmite or breccia of limestone caves. For example, the famous Kent's Hole near Torquay contains bones of mammoth, rhinoceros, lion, hyena, and bear. The red osseous breccias, charged with the bones of quadrupeds which have long disappeared from Europe, are common in almost all the countries bordering on the Mediterranean. Western Cilicia is richer in Miocene deposits than any other part of Anatolia, and the limestone gorges of the coast near Alba are crowded with fossil oysters, corals, and other shells. Here too, within the space of 5 miles, the limestone plateau is rent by 3 great chasms, which Greek religion associated with Zeus and Typhon. One of these fissures is the celebrated Corinthian cave. The city of Corycis, the Corinthian cave. To visit this spot, invested with the double charm of natural beauty and legendary renown, you start from the dead Cilician city of Corycis on the sea, with its ruined walls, towers, and churches, its rock-hewn houses and cisterns, its shattered mole, its island fortress, still imposing in decay. Viewed from the sea, this part of the Cilician coast, with its long succession of white ruins, relieved by the dark wooded hills behind, presents an appearance of populousness and splendor. But a nearer approach reveals the nakedness and desolation of the once prosperous land. Following the shore westward from Corycis for about an hour, you come to a pretty cove enclosed by wooded heights, where a spring of pure cold water bubbles up close to the sea, giving to the spot its name of Tatlusu, or the Sweet Water. From this bay, a steep ascent of about a mile along an ancient paved road leads inland to a plateau. Here, threaded your way through a labyrinth of petrified sea of jagged calcareous rocks, you suddenly find yourself on the brink of a vast chasm which yawns at your feet. This is the Corinthian cave. In reality, it is not a cave, but an immense hollow or trough in the plateau, of oval shape and perhaps half a mile in circumference. The cliffs which enclose it vary from 100 to over 200 feet in depth. Its uneven bottom slopes throughout its whole length from the north to south, and is covered by a thick jungle of trees and shrubs, myrtles, pomegranates, carobs, and many more, kept always fresh and green by rivulets, underground water, and the shadow of the great cliffs. A single narrow path leads down into its depths. The way is long and rough, but the deeper you descend, the denser grows the vegetation, and is under the dapple shade of whispering leaves and with the purling of brooks in your ears that you at last reach the bottom. The saffron which of old grew here among the bushes is no longer to be found, though it still flourishes in the surrounding district. This luxuriant bottom, with its rich verdure, its refreshing moisture, its grateful shade, is called paradise by the wandering herdsmen. They tether their camels and pasture their goats in it, and come hither in the late summer to gather the ripe pomegranates. At the southern and deepest end of this great cliff-encircled hollow, you come to the cavern proper. The ruins of a Byzantine church, which replaced a heathen temple, partially block the entrance. Inwards the cave descends with a gentle slope into the bowels of the earth. The old path, paved with polygonal masonry, still runs through it, but soon disappears under sand. At about 200 feet from its mouth, the cave comes to an end, and a tremendous roar of subterranean water is heard. By crawling on all fours, you may reach a small pool arched by a dripping stalactite-hung roof. But the stream which makes the deafening din is invisible. It was otherwise in antiquity. A river of clear water burst from the rock, but only to vanish again into a chasm. Such changes in the course of streams are common in countries subject to earthquakes and to the disruption caused by volcanic agency. The ancients believed that this mysterious cavern was haunted ground. In the rumble and roar of the waters, they seemed to hear the clash of cymbals touched by hands divine. Priests of Corinthian Zeus. If now, quitting the cavern, we return by the same path to the summit of the cliffs, we shall find on the plateau the ruins of a town and of a temple at the western edge of the great Corinthian chasm. The wall of the holy priest center was built within a few feet of the precipices, and the sanctuary must have stood right over the actual cave and its subterranean waters. In later times, the temple was converted into a Christian church. By pulling down a portion of the sacred edifice, Mr. Bent had the good fortune to discover a Greek inscription containing a long list of names, probably those of the priests who superintended the worship. One name which meets us frequently is the list at Zas, and it is tempting to regard this as merely a dialectical form of Zeus. If that were so, the priests who bore the name might be supposed to personate the god. But many strange and barbarous-looking names, evidently foreign, occur in the list, and Zas may be one of them. However, it is certain that Zeus was worshipped at the Cursian cave. For about half a mile from it, on the summit of a hill, are the ruins of a larger temple, which an inscription proves to have been dedicated to Cursian Zeus. The Cave of the Giant Typhon. But Zeus, or whatever native deity masqueraded under his name, did not reign alone in the deep dale. A more dreadful being haunted a still more awful abyss which opens in the ground only 100 yards to the east of the great Cursian chasm. It is a circular cauldron, about a quarter of a mile in circumference, resembling the Cursian chasm in its general character, but smaller, deeper, and far more terrific in appearance. Its sides overhang, and stalactites droop from them. There is no way down into it. The only mode of reaching the bottom, which is covered with vegetation, would be to be lowered at the end of a long rope. The nomads call this chasm Purgatory to distinguish it from the other, which they name Paradise. But they say that there is a subterranean passage between the two, and that the smoke of a fire kindled in the Cursian cave may be seen curling out of the other. The one ancient writer who expressly mentions this second and more grisly cavern is Meller, who says that it was the lair of the giant Typhon, and that no animal let down into it could live. Aeschylus puts into the mouth of Prometheus an account of the earth-born Typhon, dweller in Cilician caves, dread monster 100-headed, who in his pride rose up against the gods, hissing destruction from his dreadful jaws, while from his gorgon eyes the lightning flashed. But him a flaming levin bolt crashed from heaven, smote to the very heart, and now he lies, shriveled and scorched under the weight of Etna by the narrow sea. Yet one day he will belch a fiery hail, a boiling angry flood, rivers of flame to devastate the fat Cilician fields. This poetical description of the monster, confirmed by a smaller passage of Pindar, clearly proves that Typhon was conceived as a personification of those active volcanoes which spout fire and smoke to heaven as if they would assail the celestial gods. The Cursian caverns are not volcanic, but the ancients apparently regard them as such, else they would hardly have made them the den of Typhon. Battle of Zeus and Typhon. According to one legend, Typhon was a monster, half man and half brute, begotten in Cilicia by Tartarus upon the goddess Earth. The other part of him was human, but from the loins downward he was an enormous snake. In the battle of the gods and giants which was fought out in Egypt, Typhon hugged Zeus in his snaky coils, wrested from him his crooked sword, and with the blade cut the sinews of the god's hands and feet. Then taking him on his back, he conveyed the mutilated deity across the sea to Cilicia and deposited him in the Cursian cave. Here too he hid the severed sinews, wrapped in a bear's skin. But Hermes and Aegipan contrived to steal the missing thews and restore them to their divine owner. Thus made whole and strong again, Zeus pelted his beaten adversary with thunderbolts, drove him from place to place, and at last overwhelmed him under Mount Etna, and the spots where the hissing bolts fell are still marked by jets of flame. Fossil bones of extinct animals given rise to stories of giants. It is possible that the discovery of fossil bones of large extinct animals may have helped to localize the story of the giant at the Cursian cave. Such bones, as we have seen, are often found in limestone caverns, and the limestone gorges of Cilicia are in fact rich in fossils. The Arcadians laid the scene of the battle of the gods and the giants in the plain of Megalopolis, where many bones of mammoths have come to light, and where, moreover, flames have been seen to burst from the earth, and even to burn for years. These natural conditions would easily suggest a fable of giants who had fought the gods and been slain by thunderbolts. The smouldering earth with jets of flame would be regarded as a spot where the divine lightnings had struck the ground. Hence the Arcadians sacrificed to thunder and lightning. In Sicily too, great quantities of bones of mammoths, elephants, hippopotamuses, and other animals long extinct on the island have been found and have been appealed to with confidence by patriarch Sicilians as conclusive evidence of the gigantic stature of their ancestors or predecessors. These remains of huge unwieldy creatures which once trampled through the jungle or splashed in the rivers of Sicily may have contributed with the fires of Etna to build up the story of giants imprisoned under the volcano and vomiting smoke and flame from its crater. Tales of giants and monsters which stand in direct connection with the finding of great fossil bones are scattered broadcast over the mythology of the world. Huge bones, found at Punta Santa Elena in the north of Guayaquil, have served as a foundation for the story of a colony of giants who dwelt there. The whole area of the Pampas is a great sepulchre of enormous extinct animals. No wonder that one great plain should be called the Field of the Giants, and that such names as the Hill of the Giant, the Stream of the Animal, should be guides to the geologist in his search for fossil bones. Chasm of Olbian Zeus at Canetelides. About 5 miles to the northeast of the Corician caverns, but divided from them by many deep gorges and impassable rocks, is another and very similar chasm. It may be reached in about an hour and a quarter from the sea by an ancient paved road which ascends at first very steeply and then gently through bush-clad and wooded hills. Thus you come to a stretch of level ground covered with the well-preserved ruins of an ancient town. Remains of fortresses constructed of polygonal masonry, stately churches and many houses, together with numerous tombs and reliefs, finely chiselled in the calcareous limestone of the neighbourhood, bear witness to the extent and importance of the place. Yet it is mentioned by no ancient writer. Inscriptions prove that its name was Canetelides or Canetelides, which still survives in the modern form of Canediban. The great chasm opens in the very heart of the city. So crowded are the ruins that you do not perceive the abyss till you are within a few yards of it. It is almost a complete circle, about 1/4 mile wide, 3/4 mile in circumference, and uniformly 200 feet or more in depth. The cliffs go sheer down and remind the traveller of the great quarries at Syracuse. But like the Corician caves, the larger of which closely resembles, the huge fissure is natural, and its bottom, like theirs, is overgrown with trees and vegetation. 2 ways lead down into it in antiquity, both cut through the rock. One of them was a tunnel, which is now obstructed, the other is still open. Remains of columns and hewn stones in the bottom of the chasm seem to show that a temple once stood there, but there is no cave at the foot of the cliffs, and no stream flows in the deep hollow, or can be heard to rumble underground. A ruined tower of polygonal masonry, which stands on the southern edge of the chasm, bears a Greek inscription stating that it was dedicated to Olbian Zeus by the priest Teucer, son of Tarchores. The letters are beautifully cut in the style of the 3rd century before Christ. We may infer that at the time of the dedication the town belonged to the priestly kings of Olba, and that the great chasm was sacred to Olbian Zeus. The deity of these great chasms was called Zeus by the Greeks, but it was probably a god of fertility embodied in vegetation and water. What then was the character of the god who was worshipped under the name of Zeus at these 2 great natural chasms? The depth of the fissures, opening suddenly as it were without warning in the midst of a plateau, was well fitted to impress and awe the spectator, and the sight of the rank evergreen vegetation at the bottom, fed by rivulets or underground water, must have presented a striking contrast to the grey, barren, rocky wilderness of the surrounding tableland. Such a spot must have seemed to simple folk a paradise, a garden of God, the abode of higher powers who cause the wilderness to blossom, if not with roses, at least with myrtles and pomegranates for man, and with grass and underwood for his flocks. So to the Semite, as we saw, the Bough of the land is he who fertilizes it by subterranean water rather than by rain from the sky, and who therefore dwells in the depths of earth rather than in the height of heaven. In rainless countries, the sky god is deprived of one of the principal functions which he discharges in cool, cloudy climates like that of Europe. He has, in fact, little or nothing to do with the water supply, and is therefore of small excuse for levying a water rate on his worshippers. Not indeed that Cilicia is rainless, but in countries bordering on the Mediterranean, the drought is almost unbroken through the long months of summer. Vegetation then withers, the face of nature is scorched and brown, most of the rivers dry up, and only their white stony beds, hot to the foot and dazzling to the eye, remain to tell where they flowed. Is at such seasons that a green hollow, a shady rock, a murmuring stream are welcomed by the wanderer in the south with a joy and wonder which the untravelled northerner can hardly imagine. Never do the broad, slow rivers of England, with their winding reaches, their grassy banks, their grey willows mirrored with the soft English sky in the placid stream, appear so beautiful as when the traveller views them for the first time, after leaving behind him the aridity, the heat, the blinding glare of the white southern landscape, set in seas and skies of cerulean blue. Analogy of the Crucian and Albian caverns to Attis and the Vale of the Adonis. We may take it, then, as probable that the god of the Crucian and Albian caverns was worshipped as a source of fertility. In antiquity, when the river, which now roars underground, still burst from the rock in the Crucian cave, the scene must have resembled Immerse, where the god of the corn and the vine was adored at the source of the stream. And we may compare the Vale of Adonis in the Lebanon, where the divinity who gave his name to the river was revered at its foaming cascades. The three landscapes had in common the elements of luxuriant vegetation and copious streams leaping full born from the rock. We shall hardly err in supposing that these features shaped the conception of the deities who were supposed to haunt the favoured spots. At the Crucian cave, the existence of a second chasm, of a frowning and awful aspect, might well suggest the presence of an evil being who lurked in it and sought to undo the beneficent work of the good god. Thus we should have a fable of a conflict between the two, the battle of Zeus and Typhon. Two gods at Alba, perhaps a father and a son, corresponding to the Bowl and Sandown of Tarsus. On the whole, we conclude that the Albian Zeus, worshipped at one of these great limestone chasms, and clearly identical in nature with the Crucian Zeus, was also identical with the Bowl of Tarsus, the god of the corn and the vine, who in his turn can hardly be separated from the god of Attis. If my conjecture is right, the native name of the Albian Zeus was Tark or Trok, and the priestly two-thirds of Alba represented him in their own persons. On that hypothesis, the Albian priests who bore the name of Ajax embodied another native deity of unknown name, perhaps the father or the son of Tark. A comparison of the coin types of Tarsus with the Hittite monuments of Attis and Bulgar's Kui lead us to the conclusion that the people of Tarsus worshipped at least two distinct gods, a father and a son, the father god being known to the Semites as Baal and to the Greeks as Zeus, while the son was called Sandown by the natives, but Hercules by the Greeks. We may surmise that at Alba the names of Teucer and Ajax designated two gods who corresponded in type to the two gods of Tarsus, and in the lesser figure at Attis, who appears in an altitude of adoration before the deity of the corn and the vine, could be interpreted as a divine son in presence of the divine father. We should have in all three places the same pair of deities, represented probably in the flesh by successive generations of priestly kings. But the evidence is far too slender to justify us in advancing this hypothesis as anything more than bare conjecture. Part 8. Cilician Goddesses. Goddesses less prominent than gods in Cilician religion. So far, the Cilician deities discussed have been males, We have as yet found no trace of the great mother goddess who plays so important a part in the religion of Cappadocia and Phrygia beyond the great dividing range of the Taurus. Yet we may suspect that she was not unknown in Cilicia, though her worship certainly seems to have been far less prominent there than in the centre of Asia Minor. The difference may perhaps be interpreted as evidence that mother kin and hence the predominance of mother goddesses survived in the bleak highlands of the interior, long after a genial climate and teeming soil had fostered the growth of a higher civilization, and with it the advance from female to male kinship in the rich lowlands of Cilicia. Be that as it may, Cilician goddesses, with or without a male partner, are known to have been revered in various parts of the country. The goddess Attis, partner of Bough at Tarsus, seems to have been a form of Attis, the lion goddess and the bull god. In latter times, the old goddess became the fortune of the city. Thus at Tarsus itself, the goddess Attis was worshipped along with Bough. Their effigies are engraved on the same coins of the city. She is represented wearing a veil and seated upon a lion, with her name in Aramaic letters engraved beside her. It would seem that at Tarsus, as at Bough, the father god mated with the lion goddess like the Phrygian Cybele or the Syrian Attis. Now the name Attis is a Greek rendering of the Aramaic Athe, a compound word which includes the name of the goddess of Tarsus. Thus in name as well as in attributes, the female partner of the Baal of Tarsus appears to correspond to Attis, the Syrian mother goddess whose image, seated on a lion or lions, was worshipped with great pomp and splendor at Hierapolis, Bambyce, near the Euphrates. We may go a step further and find a correspondence between the Baal of Tarsus and the husband god of Attis at Hierapolis, Bambyce. That husband god, like the Baal of Tarsus, was identified by the Greeks with Zeus, and Lucian tells us that the resemblance of his image to the images of Zeus was in all respects unmistakable. But his image, unlike those of Zeus, was seated upon bulls. In point of fact, he was probably Hadad, the chief male god of the Syrians, who appears to have been a god of thunder and fertility. For at Baalbek in the Lebanon, where the ruined temple of the sun is the most imposing monument bequeathed to the modern world by Greek art in its decline, his image grasped in his left hand a thunderbolt and ears of corn, and a colossal statue of the deity found near Zengirli in northern Syria represents him with a bearded human head and horns, the emblem of strength and fertility. A similar god of thunder and lightning was worshipped from the early times by the Babylonians and Assyrians. He bore the similar name of Hadad, and his emblems appear to have been a thunderbolt and a bull. On an Assyrian relief, his image is represented as that of a bearded man clad in a short tunic, wearing a cap with 2 pairs of horns, and grasping an axe in his right hand and a thunderbolt in his left. His resemblance to the Hittite god of the thundering sky was therefore very close. An alternative name for this Babylonian and Assyrian deity was Raman, an appropriate term derived from a verb ramamu, to scream or roar. Now we have seen that the god of a breeze, whose attributes tally with those of the Baal of Tarsus, wears a cap adorned with bull's horns. That the father god of Bough, meeting the mother goddess on her lioness, is attended by an animal which according to the usual interpretation is a bull, and that the bull itself was worshipped, apparently as an emblem of fertility, at Uyuk near Bough. Thus at Tarsus and Bough, as at Hierapolis, Bambyce, the father god and the mother goddess were seen to have had as their sacred animals or emblems the bull and the lion respectively. In later times, under Greek influence, the goddess was apparently exchanged for, or converted into, the fortune of the city, who appears on coins of Tarsus as a seated woman with veiled and turreted head, grasping ears of corn and a poppy in her hand. Her lion is gone, but a trace of him perhaps remains on a coin which exhibits the throne of the goddess adorned with a lion's leg. In general, it would seem that the goddess Fortune who figures commonly as the guardian of cities in the Greek East, especially in Syria, was nothing but a disguised form of Gad, the Semitic god of fortune or luck, who, through the exigencies of grammar, required him to be masculine, is supposed to have been often merely a special aspect of the Greek goddess Astarte or Atargatis, conceived as a patroness and protector of towns. In Oriental religion, such permutations or combinations need not surprise us. To the gods all things are possible. In Cyprus, the goddess of love wore a beard, and Alexander the Great sometimes disported himself in the costume of Artemis, while at other times he ransacked the divine wardrobe to figure in the garb of Hercules, of Hermes, and of Ammon. The change of the goddess of Athe of Tarsus into Gad or Fortune would be easy, we suppose, that he was known as Gad Athe, luck of Athe, which occurs as a Semitic personal name. In like manner, the goddess of fortune at Olba, who had her small temple beside the great temple of Zeus, may have been originally the consort of the native god Tark or Tarku. The Phoenician god El and his wife Attis in Cilicia, assimilation of native Oriental deities to Greek divinities. Another town in Cilicia where an Oriental god and goddess appear to have been worshipped together was Malis. The city was built on a height in the great Cilician plain near the mouth of the river Paramus. Its coins exhibit two winged deities, a male and a female, in a kneeling or running attitude. On some of the coins, the male deity is represented like Janus, with two heads facing opposite ways, and with two pairs of wings, while beneath him is the forepart of a bull with a human head. The obverse of the coins which bear the female deity displays a conical stone, sometimes flanked by two bunches of grapes. This conical stone, like those of other Asiatic deities, was probably the emblem of a mother goddess, and the bunches of grapes indicate her fertilizing powers. The god with the two heads and four wings can hardly be any other than the Phoenician El, whom the Greeks called Cronus, for El was characterized by 4 eyes, 2 in the front and 2 behind, and by 3 pairs of wings. A discrepancy in the number of wings can scarcely be deemed fatal to the identification. The god may easily have molted some superfluous feathers on the road from Phoenicia to Malis. On later coins of Malis, these quaint Oriental deities disappear, and are replaced by corresponding Greek deities, particularly by a head of Cronus on one side and a figure of Demeter grasping ears of corn on the other. The change doubtless sprang from a wish to assimilate the ancient native divinities to the new and fashionable divinities of the Greek pantheon. If Cronus and Demeter, the harvest god and goddess, were chosen to supplant El and his female consort, the ground of the choice must certainly have been a supposed resemblance between the two pairs of deities. We may assume, therefore, that the discarded couple, El and his wife, had also been worshipped by the husbandmen as sources of fertility, the givers of corn and wine. One of these latter coins of Malis exhibits Dionysus sitting on a vine laden with ripe clusters, while in the obverse is seen a male figure guiding a yoke of oxen as if in the act of ploughing. These types of the vine god and the ploughman probably represent another attempt to adapt the native religion to changed conditions, to pour the old Asiatic wine into new Greek bottles. The barbarous monster with its multiplicity of heads and wings has been reduced to a perfectly human Dionysus. The sacred but deplorable old conical stone no longer flaunts proudly on the coins. It is retired to a decent obscurity in favour of a natural and graceful vine. It is thus that a truly progressive theology keeps pace with the march of intellect. But if these things were done by the apostles of culture at Malis, we cannot suppose that the clergy of Tarsus, the capital, lagged behind their provincial brethren in their efforts to place the ancient faith upon a sound modern basis. The fruit of their labours seems to have been more or less nominal substantiation of Zeus, and Hercules for Bough, Ather, and Santan. Sarpedonian Artemis, the goddess Frazer at Heliopolis Casatava. The fire walk and the worship of Frazer, insensibility to pain regarded as a mark of inspiration. We may suspect that in like manner the Sarpedonian Artemis, who had a sanctuary in southeastern Cilicia near the Syrian border, was really a native goddess parading in borrowed plumes. She gave oracular responses by the mouth of inspired men, or more probably of women, who in their moments of divine ecstasy may have been deemed incarnations of her divinity. Another even more transparently Asiatic goddess was Frazer, or Artemis Frazer, who was worshipped at Heliopolis Castabella in eastern Cilicia. The extensive ruins of the ancient city, now known as Bough, cover the slope of a hill about 3/4 of a mile to the north of the river Paramus. Above them towers the Acropolis, built on the summit of dark grey precipices and divided from the neighbouring mountain by a deep cutting in the rock. A medieval castle, built of hewn rocks of reddish yellow limestone, has replaced the ancient citadel. The city possessed a large theatre and was traversed by 2 handsome colonnades, of which some columns are still standing among the ruins. A thick growth of brushwood and grass now covers most of the site, and the place is wild and solitary. Only the wandering herdsmen encamp near the desert city in winter and spring. The neighbourhood is treeless, yet in May magnificent fields of wheat and barley gladden the eye, and in the valleys the clover grows as high as the horse's knees. The ambiguous nature of the goddess who presided over the city of the sanctuary, Heliopolis, was confessed by a puzzle worshipper, a physician named Lucius Minus Claudinius, who confided his doubts to the deity herself in some very indifferent Greek verses. He wisely left it to the goddess to say whether she was Artemis, or the moon, or Hecate, or Aphrodite, or Demeter. All that we know about her is that her true name was Frazer, and that she was in the enjoyment of certain revenues. Further, we may reasonably conjecture that at the Cilician Castabella she was worshipped with rites like those which were held in honour of her namesake, Artemis Frazer, at another city of the same name, Castabella in Cappadocia. There, as we saw, the priestesses of the goddess walked over fire with bare feet unscathed. Probably the same impressive ceremony was performed before a crowd of worshippers in the Cilician Castabella also. Whatever the exact meaning of the rite may have been, the goddess was in all probability one of those Asiatic mother goddesses to whom the Greeks often applied the name of Artemis. The immunity enjoyed by the priests in the furnace was attributed to inspiration by the deity. In discussing the nature of inspiration or possession by a deity, the Syrian philosopher Jamblichus notes as one of its symptoms a total insensibility to pain. Many inspired persons, he tells us, are not burned by fire, the fire not taking hold of them by reason of the divine inspiration, and many, though they are burned, perceive it not, because at the time they do not live an animal life. They pierce themselves with skewers and feel nothing. They gash their backs with hatchets. They slash their arms with daggers. They know not what they do, because their acts are not those of mere men. For impassable places become passable to those who are filled with the Spirit. They rush into fire. They pass through fire. They cross rivers, like the priestess at Castabella. These things prove that under the influence of inspiration, men are beside themselves, that their senses, their will, their life, are those neither of man nor of beast, but that they lead another or a diviner life instead, whereby they are inspired and wholly possessed. Thus in traversing the fiery furnace, the priestesses of Frazer were believed to be beside themselves, to be filled with the goddess, to be in a real sense incarnations of her divinity. A similar touchstone of inspiration is still applied by some villages in the Himalayan districts of northwestern India. Once a year they worship Ayiri, a local deity who is represented by a trident and has his temples on lonely hills and desolate tracts. At his festival, the people seat themselves in a circle about a bonfire. A kettle drum is beaten, and one by one his worshippers become possessed by the god and leap with shouts around the flames. Some brand themselves with heated iron spoons and sit down in the fire. Such as escape, unheard, are believed to be truly inspired, while those who burn themselves are despised as mere pretenders to the divine frenzy. Persons thus possessed by the spirit are called Abi's horses or his slaves. During the revels, which commonly last about 10 days, they wear red scarves round their heads and receive alms from the faithful. These men deem themselves so holy that they will let nobody touch them, and they alone may touch the sacred trident, the emblem of their god. In Western Asia itself, modern fanatics still practice the same austerities, which were practiced by their brethren in the days of Jamblichus. Asia Minor abounds in dervishes of different orders, who lap red-hot iron, calling it their rose, chew coals of living fire, strike their heads against solid walls, stab themselves in the cheek, the scalp at the temple, with sharp spikes set in heavy weights, shouting, Allah, Allah, and always constantly avowing that during such frenzy they are entirely insensible to pain. Part 9. The Burning of Cilician Gods. The divine triad, Bough, Attis, and Sandan at Tarsus, may be impersonated by priests and priestesses. On the whole, then, we seem to be justified in concluding that under a thin veneer of Greek humanity, the barbarous native gods of Cilicia continue long to survive, and that among them the great Asiatic goddess retained a place, though not the prominent place which she held in the highlands of the interior down at least to the beginning of our era. The principle that the inspired priest or priestesses represents the deity or person appears, if I am right, to have been recognized at Castabella and Olba, as well as at the sanctuary of Sarpedonian Artemis. There can be no intrinsic improbability, therefore, in the view that at Tarsus also, the divine triad of Baal, Attis, and Sandan may also have been personated by priests and priestesses, who, on the analogy of Olba and of the great sanctuaries in the interior of Asia Minor, would originally be at the same time kings and queens, princesses and princesses. Further, the burning of Sandan and effigy at Tarsus would, on this hypothesis, answer to the walk of the priestess of Peresia through the furnace of Castabella. Both were perhaps mitigations of a custom of putting the priestly king or queen, or another member of the royal family, to death by fire. End of Section 8. Section 9. Chapter 7. Sardanapalus and Hercules. Part 1. The Burning of Sardanapalus. Tarsus said to have been founded by the Assyrian king Sardanapalus, who burned himself on a pyre. Deaths of Babylonian and Assyrian kings on the pyre. The theory that kings or princes were formerly burned to death at Tarsus in the character of gods is singularly confirmed by another and wholly independent line of argument. For, according to one account, the city of Tarsus was founded not by Sandan, but by Sardanapalus, the famous Assyrian monarch whose death on a great pyre was one of the most famous incidents in Oriental legend. Near the sea, within a day's march of Tarsus, might be seen in antiquity the ruins of a great ancient city named Anchiel, and outside its walls stood a monument called the Monument of Sardanapalus, on which was carved in stone the figure of the monarch. He was represented snapping the fingers of his right hand, and the gesture was explained by an accompanying inscription engraved in Assyrian characters to the following effect: Sardanapalus, son of Anaxanthraxes, built Anchiel and Tarsus in one day. Eat, drink, and play, for everything else is not worth that, by which was implied that all other human affairs are not worth a snap of the fingers. The gesture may have been misinterpreted, and the inscription mistranslated, but there is no reason to doubt the existence of such a monument, though we may conjecture that it was of Hittite rather than Assyrian origin. For, not to speak of the traces of Hittite art and religion which we have found at Tarsus, a group of Hittite monuments have been discovered at Marash in the upper valley of the Pyramus. The Assyrians may have ruled over Cilicia for a time, but Hittite influence was probably much deeper and more lasting. The story that Tarsus was founded by son Apollos may well be apocryphal, but there must have been some reason for his association with the city. On the present hypothesis, that reason is to be found in the traditional manner of his death. To avoid falling into the hands of the rebels who laid siege to Nineveh, he built a huge pyre in his palace, heaped it up with gold and silver and purple raiment, and then burnt himself, his wife, his concubines, and his eunuchs in that fire. The story is false of the historical son of Apollos, that is, of the great Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, but is true of his brother Shamash Shumukin. Being appointed king of Babylon by Ashurbanipal, he revolted against his suzerain and benefactor, and was besieged by him in his capital. The siege was long and the resistance desperate, for the Babylonians knew that they had no mercy to expect from the ruthless Assyrians. But they were decimated by famine and pestilence, and when the city could hold out no more, King Shamash Shumukin, determined not to fall alive into the hands of his offended brother, shut himself up in his palace, and there burned himself to death, along with his wives, his children, his slaves, and his treasures, at the very moment when the conquerors were breaking in the gates. Not many years afterwards, the same tragedy was repeated in Nineveh itself by Saracus, or Shin-Sharishkun, the last king of Assyria. Besieged by the rebel Nabopolassar, the king of Babylon, and by Cyaxares, king of the Medes, he burned himself in his palace. That was the end of Nineveh and of the Assyrian Empire. Thus Greek history preserved the memory of the catastrophe, but transferred it from the real victims to the far more famous Ashurbanipal, whose figure in the after ages loomed vast and dim against the setting sun of Assyrian glory. Part 2. The Burning of Croesus. Story that Cyrus intended to burn Croesus alive. It is unlikely that the Persians would thus have polluted the sacred element of fire. Another Oriental monarch who prepared, at least, to die in the flames was Croesus, king of Lydia. Herodotus tells how the Persians and Osiris captured Sardes, the Lydian capital, and took Croesus alive, and how Cyrus caused a great pyre to be erected, on which he placed the captive monarch in fetters, and with him twice 7 Lydian youths. Fire was then applied to the pile, but at the last moment Croesus relented. A sudden shower extinguished the flames, and Croesus was spared. But it is not improbable that the Persians, with a profound reverence for the sanctity of fire, should have thought defiling the sacred element with the worst of all pollutants, the contact of dead bodies. Such an act would have seemed to them sacrilege of the deepest dye. For to them fire was the earthly form of the heavenly light, the eternal, the infinite, the divine. Death, on the other hand, was in their opinion the main source of corruption and uncleanness. Hence they took the most stringent precautions to guard the purity of fire from the defilement of death. If a man or a dog died in a house where the holy fire burned, the fire had to be removed from the house and kept away for 9 nights, in winter or a month in summer, before it might be brought back. And if any man broke the rule by bringing back the fire within the appointed time, he might be punished with 200 stripes. As for burning a corpse in the fire, it was the most heinous of all sins, an invention of Ahriman, the devil. There was no atonement for it, and it was punished with death. Nor did the law remain a dead letter. Down to the beginning of our era, the death penalty was inflicted on all who threw a corpse or cow dung on the fire, nay, even on such as blow on the fire with their breath. It is hard, therefore, to believe that a Persian king should have commanded his subjects to perpetrate a deed which he and they viewed with horror as the most flagitious sacrilege conceivable. The older and truer tradition was that in the extremity of his fortunes, Croesus attempted to burn himself. Another, and in some respects truer version of the story of Croesus and Cyrus has been preserved by two older witnesses, namely by the Greek poet Bacchylides, who was born some 40 years after the event, and by a Greek artist who painted the scene on a red figured vase about soon after the time of the poet's birth. Bacchylides tells us that when the Persians captured Sardes, Croesus, unable to brook the thought of slavery, caused a pyre to be erected in front of his courtyard, mounted it with his wife and daughters, and bade a page apply a light to the wood. A bright blaze shot up, but Zeus extinguished it with rain from heaven, and Apollo of the golden sword wafted the pierced king and his daughters to the happy land beyond the north wind. In like manner, the vase painter clearly represents the burning of Croesus as a voluntary act, not as a punishment inflicted on him by the conqueror. He lets us see the king enthroned upon the pyre with a wreath of laurel on his head and a scepter in one hand, while with the other he is pouring a libation. An attendant is in the act of applying to the pile two objects which have been variously interpreted as torches to kindle the wood or whisks to sprinkle holy water. The demeanour of the king is solemn and composed. He seems to be performing a religious rite, not suffering an ignominious death. Thus we may fairly conclude with some eminent modern scholars that in the extremity of his fortunes, Croesus prepared to meet death like a king or a god in the flames. It was thus that Hercules, from whom the old kings of Lydia claimed to be sprung, ascended from earth to heaven. It was thus that Zimri, king of Israel, passed beyond the reach of his enemies. It was thus that Shamash-shamash-kin, king of Babylon, escaped a brother's vengeance. It was thus that the last king of Assyria expired in the ruins of his capital, and it was thus that, 66 years after the capture of Sardes, the Carthaginian king Hamilcar sought to retrieve a lost battle by a hero's death. Legend that Semiramis burnt herself on a pyre. Semiramis herself, the legendary queen of Assyria, is said to have burnt herself on a pyre out of grief at the death of her favourite horse. Since there are strong grounds for regarding the queen in her mythical aspect as a form of Ishtar or Astarte, the legend that Semiramis died for love in the flames furnishes a remarkable parallel to the traditionary death of the love-lorn Dido, who herself appears to be simply an avatar of the same great Asiatic goddess. When we compare these stories of the burning of Semiramis and Dido with each other, and with the historical case of the burning of Oriental monarchs, we may perhaps conclude that there was a time when queens, as well as kings, were expected under certain circumstances, perhaps on the death of their consort, to perish in the fire. The conclusion can hardly be deemed extravagant when we remember that the practice of burning widows to death survived in India under English rule down to a time within living memory. The Great Burnings for Jewish Kings. At Jerusalem itself, a reminiscence of the practice of burning kings, alive or dead, appears to have lingered as late as the time of Isaiah, who says, "For Tophet is prepared of old, yea, for the king it is made ready. He hath made it deep and large, the pile thereof is fire and much wood. The breath of the Lord, like a stream of brimstone, doth kindle it." We know that great burnings were regularly made for dead kings of Judah, and it can hardly be accidental that the place assigned by Isaiah to the king's pyre is the very spot in the valley of Hinnom where the firstborn children were actually burned by their parents in honor of Moloch, the king. The exact site of the valley of Hinnom is disputed, but all are agreed in identifying it with one of the ravines which encircle or intersect Jerusalem, and according to some eminent authorities, it was the one called by Josephus the Tidal Peon. If this last identification is correct, the valley where the children were burned on a pyre lay immediately beneath the royal palace and the temple. Perhaps the young victims died for God and the king. The Great Burnings for Jewish Rabbis at Meron in Galilee. With the great burnings for dead Jewish kings, it seems worthwhile to compare the great burnings still annually made for dead Jewish rabbis at the lofty village of Meron in Galilee, the most famous and venerated place for pilgrimage for Jews in the modern Palestine. Here the tombs of the rabbis are hewn out of the rock, and here on the 30th of April, the eve of May Day, multitudes of pilgrims, both men and women, assemble and burn their offerings, which consist of shawls, scarves, handkerchiefs, books, and the like. These are placed in 2 stone basins on the top of 2 low pillars, and being drenched with oil and ignited, they are consumed to ashes amid the loud applause, shouts, and cries of the spectators. A man has been known to pay as much as 2,000 piastres for the privilege of being allowed to open the cemetery by burning a costly shawl. On such occasions, the solemn, unmoved serenity of the Turkish officials who keep order presents a striking contrast to the intense excitement of the Jews. This curious ceremony may be explained by the widespread practice of burning property for the use and benefit of the dead. So, to take a single instance, the tyrant Periander collected the first raiment of all the women in Corinth and burned it in a pit for his dead wife, who had sent him word by necromancy that she was cold and naked in the other world, because the clothes he buried with her had not been burnt. In like manner, perhaps, garments and other valuables may have been consumed on the pyre for the use of the dead kings of Judah. In Siam, the corpse of a king or queen is burned in a huge structure resembling a permanent palace, and with its many gabled and high-pitched roofs and multitudinous tinselled spires, soaring to a height of over 200 feet, sometimes occupies an area of about an acre. The blaze of such an enormous catafalque may resemble, even if it surpasses, the great burnings for the Jewish kings. Part 3. Purification by Fire. Death by fire regarded by the ancients as a kind of apotheosis. Fire was supposed to purge away the mortal parts of men, leaving the immortal. These events and these traditions seem to prove that under certain circumstances, Oriental monarchs deliberately chose to burn themselves to death. What were these circumstances, and what were the consequences of the act? If the intention had merely been to escape from the hands of the conqueror, an easier mode of death would naturally have been chosen. There must have been a special reason for electing to die by fire. The legendary death of Hercules, the historical death of Hamilcar, and the picture of Croesus enthroned in state on the pyre and pouring a libation, all combined to indicate that to be burnt alive was regarded as a solemn sacrifice. Nay, more than that, as an apotheosis which raised the victims to the rank of a god. For it is to be remembered that Hamilcar as well as Hercules was worshipped unto death. Fire, moreover, was regarded by the ancients as a prerogative so powerful that properly applied it could burn away all that was mortal of man, leaving only the divine and immortal spirit behind. Hence we read of goddesses who is said to confer immortality on the infant sons of kings by burning them in the fire by night. But their beneficent purpose was always frustrated by the ignorant interposition of the mother or father, who peeping into the room saw the child in the flames and raised a cry of horror, thus disconcerting the goddess and her magic rites. This story is told of Isis in the house of the king of Byblos, of Demeter in the house of the king of Eleusis, and of Thetis in the house of her mortal husband Peleus. In a slightly different way, the witch Medea professed to give back to the old their lost youth by boiling them with her hell broth in her magic cauldron. And when Pelops had been butchered and served up at a banquet of the gods by his cruel father Tantalus, the divine beings, touched with pity, plunged his mangled remains in a kettle, from which after decoction emerged alive and young. Fire, says Jamblichus, destroys the material part of sacrifices. It purifies all things that are brought near it, releasing them from the bonds of matter, and in virtue of the purity of its nature, making them meet for communion with the gods. So too it releases us from the bondage of corruption, it likens us to the gods, it makes us meet for their friendship, and it converts our material nature into an immaterial. Thus we can understand why kings and commoners who claimed or aspired to divinity should choose death by fire. It opened to them the gates of heaven. The quack Peregrinus, who ended his disreputable career in the flames of Olympia, gave out that after death he would be turned into a spirit who would guard men from the perils of the night. As Lucian remarked, no doubt there were plenty of fools to believe him. According to one account, the Sicilian philosopher Empedocles, who set up for being a god in his lifetime, leaped into the crater of Etna in order to establish his claimed godhead. There was nothing incredible in the tradition. The crack-brained philosopher, with his itch for notoriety, may well have done what Indian fakirs and the brazen-faced mountebank Peregrinus did in antiquity, and what Russian peasants and Chinese Buddhists have done in modern times. There is no extremity to which fanaticism or vanity, or a mixture of the two, will not impel its victims. Part 4. The Divinity of Lydian Kings. The Lydian kings seem to have claimed divinity on the ground of their descent from Hercules, the god of the double axe and of the lion, and this Lydian Hercules or Sandan appears to have been the same with the Cilician Sandan. Lydian kings held responsible for the weather and the crops. But apart from any general notions of the purificatory virtues of fire, the kings of Lydia seem to have had a special reason for regarding death in the flames as their appropriate end. For the ancient dynasty of the Heraclids, which preceded the house of Croesus on the throne, traced their descent from a god or hero whom the Greeks called Hercules. And this Lydian Hercules appears to have been identical in name and in substance with the Cilician Hercules, whose effigy was regularly burned on a great pyre at Tarsus. The Lydian Hercules bore the name of Sandon. The Cilician Hercules bore the name of Sandan, or perhaps rather of Sandan, since Sandon is known from inscriptions and other evidence to have been a Cilician name. The characteristic emblems of the Cilician Hercules were the lion and the double-headed axe, and both these emblems meet us at Sardes in connection with the dynasty of the Heraclids. For the double-headed axe was carried as part of the sacred regalia by Lydian kings from the time of the legendary queen Omphale down to the reign of Candaeus, the last of the Heraclid kings. It is said to have been given to Omphale by Hercules himself, and it was apparently regarded as a palladium of the Heraclid sovereignty, for after the dotard Candaeus ceased to carry the axe himself, he had handed it over to the keeping of a courtier. A rebellion broke out, and the ancient dynasty of the Heraclids came to an end. The new king Gyges did not attempt to carry the old emblem of sovereignty. He dedicated it with other spoils to Zeus in Caria. Hence the image of the Carian Zeus bore an axe in his hand and received the epithet of Labrandius, from labrais, the Lydian word for axe. Such is Plutarch's account, but we may suspect that Zeus, or rather the native god whom the Greeks identified with Zeus, carried the axe long before the time of Candaeus. If, as is commonly supposed, the axe was a symbol of the Asiatic thunder god, it would be an appropriate emblem in the hand of kings, who are so often expected to make rain, thunder, and lightning for the good of their people. Whether the kings of Lydia were bound to make thunder and rain, we do not know, but at all events, like many early monarchs, they seem to have been held responsible for the weather and the crops. In the reign of Menos, the country suffered severely from dearth, so the people consulted an oracle, and the deity laid the blame on the kings, one of whom had in former years incurred the guilt of murder. The soothsayers accordingly declared that King Menos, although his own hands were clean, must be banished for 3 years in order that the taint of bloodshed should be purged away. The king obeyed and retired to Babylon, where he lived 3 years. In his absence, the kingdom was administered by a deputy, a certain Sadiates, son of Cadiz, who traced his descent from Tylon. As to this Tylon, we shall hear more presently. Again we read that the Lydians rejoiced greatly at the assassination of Spermus, another of their kings, for he was very wicked, and the land suffered from drought in his reign. Apparently, like the ancient Irish and many modern Africans, they laid the drought at the king's door and thought that he only got what he deserved under the knife of the assassin. The lion god of Lydia. With regard to the lion, the other emblem of the Cilician Hercules, we are told that the same King Minos, who was banished because of a dearth, sought to make the Acropolis of Sardes impregnable by carrying round it a lion which a concubine had borne to him. Unfortunately, at a single point where the precipice was struck that it seemed as if no human foot could scale them, he omitted to carry the beast, and sure enough, at that very point, the Persians afterwards clambered up into the citadel. Now Minos was one of the old Heraclid dynasty, who boasted their descent from the lion hero Hercules. Hence the carrying of a lion round the Acropolis was probably a form of consecration, intended to place the stronghold under the guardianship of the lion god, the hereditary deity of the royal family. And the story that the king's concubine gave birth to a lion's whelp suggests that the Lydian kings not only claimed kingship with the beast, but posed as lions in their own persons and passed off their sons as lion cubs. Croesus dedicated at Delphi a lion of pure gold, perhaps as a badge of Lydia, and Hercules with his lion skin is a common type on coins of Sardes. Identity of the Lydian and Cilician Hercules. Thus the death, or the attempted death, of Croesus on the pyre completes the analogy between the Cilician and the Lydian Hercules. At Tarsus and at Sardes, we find the worship of a god whose symbols were the lion and the double-headed axe, and who was burned on a great pyre, either in effigy or in the person of a human representative. The Greeks called him Hercules, but his native name was Sandan or Sandon. At Sardes he seems to have been personated by the kings, who carried the double axe and perhaps wore, like their ancestor Hercules, the lion's skin. We may conjecture that at Tarsus also the royal family aped the lion god. At all events, we know that Sandan, the name of the god, entered into the names of Cilician kings, and that in later times the priests of Sandan at Tarsus wore the royal purple. Part 5. Hittite gods at Tarsus and Sardes. The Cilician and Lydian Hercules, Sandan or Sandon, seems to have been a Hittite deity. Now we have traced the religion of Tarsus back by a double thread to the Hittite religion of Cappadocia. One thread joins the Bough of Tarsus, with his grapes and his corn, to the god of a breeze. The other thread unites the Sandan of Tarsus, with his lion and his double axe, to the similar figure at Bogas Kui. Without being unduly fanciful, therefore, we may surmise that the Sandan Hercules of Lydia was also a Hittite god, and that the Herculid dynasty of Lydia were of Hittite blood. Certainly the influence, if not the rule, of the Hittites extended to Lydia, for at least 2 rock carvings accompanied by Hittite inscriptions are still to be seen in the country. Both of them attracted the attention of the ancient Greeks. One of them represents a god or warrior in Hittite costume, armed with a spear or bow. It is carved on the face of a grey rock, which stands out conspicuous on a bushy hillside, where an old road runs through a glen from the valley of the Hermes to the valley of the Caster. The place is now called Carabel. Herodotus thought that the figure represented the Egyptian king and conqueror Sesostris. The other monument is a colossal seated figure of the Mother of the Gods, locally known in antiquity as Mother Plastine. It is hewn out of the solid rock and occupies a large niche in the face of a cliff at the steep northern foot of Mount Sepilis. Thus would seem that at some time or other the Hittites carried their arms to the shores of the Aegean. There is no improbability, therefore, in the view that a Hittite dynasty may have reigned at Sardes. Part 6. The Resurrection of Tylon. Death and Resurrection of the Lydian hero Tylon. Feast of the Golden Flower at Attis. The burning of Sandan, like that of Melkarth, was probably followed by a ceremony of his resurrection or awakening, to indicate that the divine life was not extinct, but had only assumed a fresher and purer form. Of that resurrection we have, so far as I am aware, no direct evidence. In default of it, however, there is a tale of a local Lydian hero called Tylon or Tylus, who was killed and brought back to life again. The story runs thus. Tylon or Tylus was a son of Earth. One day, as he was walking on the banks of the Hermes, a serpent stung and killed him. His distressed sister, Moir, had recourse to a giant named Damasen, who attacked and slew the serpent. But the serpent's mate called a herb, the flower of Zeus, in the woods, and bringing it to her mouth, put it to the lips of the dead serpent, which immediately revived. In her turn, Moir took the hint and restored her brother Tylon to life by touching him with the same plant. A similar incident occurs in many folk tales. Serpents are often credited with a knowledge of life-giving plants. But Tylon seems to have been more than a mere hero of fairy tales. He was closely associated with Sardes, for he figures on the coins of the city along with his champion Damasen or Masnes, the dead serpent, and a life-giving branch. And he was related in various ways to the royal family of Lydia, for his daughter married Attis, one of the earliest kings of the country, and a descendant of his acted as regent during the banishment of King Manus. It has been suggested that the story of his death and resurrection was acted as a pageant to symbolize the revival of plant life in spring. At all events, a festival called the Feast of the Golden Flower was celebrated in honor of Persephone at Sardes, probably in one of the vernal months, and the revival of the hero and of the goddess may well have been represented together. The golden flower of the festival would then be the flower of Zeus, of the legend, perhaps the yellow crocus of nature, or rather her more gorgeous sister, the oriental saffron. For saffron grew in great abundance at the Corycian cave of Zeus, and it is an elegant conjecture, if it is nothing more, that the very name of the place meant the crocus cave. However, on the coins of Sardes, the magical plant seems to be a branch rather than a blossom, a golden bough rather than a golden flower. End of Section 9. Section 10. Chapter 8. Volcanic Religion. Part 1. The Burning of a God. The custom of burning a god may have been intended to recruit his divine energies. Thus it appears that a custom of burning a god in effigy or in the person of a human representative was practiced by at least two peoples of Western Asia, the Phoenicians and the Hittites. Whether they both developed the custom independently or whether one of them adopted it from the other, we cannot say, and the reasons for celebrating a rite which to us seems strange and monstrous are also obscure. In the preceding inquiry, some grounds have been adduced for thinking that the practice was based on a conception of the purifying virtue of fire, which, by destroying the corruptible and perishable elements of man, was supposed to fit him for a union with the imperishable and the divine. Now to people who created their gods in their own likeness, and imagined them subject to the same law of decadence and death, the idea would naturally occur that fire might do for the gods what it was believed to do for men, that it could purge them of the taint of corruption and decay, could sift the mortal from the immortal in their composition, and so endow them with eternal youth. Hence a custom might arise of subjecting the deities themselves, or the more important of them, to an ideal of fire for the purpose of refreshing and renovating those creative energies on the maintenance of which so much depended. To the coarse apprehension of the uninstructed and unsympathetic observer, the solemn rite might easily wear a very different aspect. According as he was of a pious or of a sceptical turn of mind, he might denounce it as a sacrilege or derided as an absurdity. To burn the god whom you worship, he might say, is the height of impiety and of folly. If you succeed in the attempt, you kill him and deprive yourselves of his valuable services. If you fail, you have mortally offended him, and sooner or later he will visit you with his severe displeasure. To this the worshipper, if he was patient and polite, might listen with a smile of indulgent pity for the ignorance and obtuseness of the critic. You are much mistaken, he might observe, in imagining that we expect or attempt to kill the god whom we adore. The idea of such a thing is as repugnant to us as to you. Our intention is precisely the opposite of that which you attribute to us. Far from wishing to destroy the deity, we desire to make him live forever, to place him beyond the reach of that process of degeneration and final dissolution to which all things here below appear by their nature to be subject. He does not die in the fire. Oh no, only the corruptible and mortal part of him perishes in the flames. All that is incorruptible and immortal of him will survive the purer and stronger for being freed from the contagion of baser elements. That little heap of ashes which you see there is not our God. It is only the skin which he has sloughed, the husk which he has cast. He himself is far away in the clouds of heaven, in the depths of earth, in the running waters, in the tree and the flower, in the corn and the vine. We do not see him face to face, but every year he manifests his divine life afresh in the blossoms of spring and the fruits of autumn. We eat of his broken body in bread, we drink of his shed blood in the juice of the grape. Part 2. The volcanic region of Cappadocia. The custom of burning a god may have stood in some relation to volcanic phenomena. Some such train of reasoning may suffice to explain, though naturally not to justify, the custom which we bluntly call the burning of a god. Yet it is worthwhile to ask whether, in the development of the practice, these general considerations may not have been reinforced or modified by special circumstances, for example, by the natural features of the country where the custom grew up. For the history of religion, like that of all other human institutions, has been profoundly affected by local conditions and cannot be fully understood apart from them. Now Asia Minor, the region where the practice in question appears to have been widely diffused, has from time immemorial been subjected to the action of volcanic forces on a great scale. It is true that, so far as the memory of man goes back, the craters of its volcanoes have been extinct, but the vestiges of their dead or slumbering fires are to be seen in many places, and the country has been shaken and rent at intervals by tremendous earthquakes. These phenomena cannot fail to have impressed the imagination of the inhabitants, and thereby to have left some mark on their religion. The great extinct volcano, Mount Argeus in Cappadocia. Among the extinct volcanoes of Anatolia, the greatest is Mount Argeus, in the centre of Cappadocia, the heart of the old Hittite country. It is indeed the highest point of Asia Minor, and one of the loftiest mountains known to the ancients, for in height it falls not very far short of Mount Blanc. Towering abruptly in a huge pyramid from the plain, it is a conspicuous object for miles on miles. Its top is white with eternal snow, and in antiquity its lower slopes were clothed with dense forests, from which the inhabitants of the treeless Cappadocian plains drew their supply of timber. In these woods, and in the low grounds at the foot of the mountain, the languishing fires of the volcano manifested themselves as late as the beginning of our era. The ground was treacherous. Under a grassy surface there lurked pits of fire, into which stray cattle and unworried travellers often fell. Experienced woodmen used great caution when they went to fell trees in the forest. Elsewhere the soil was marshy, and flames were seen to play over it at night. Superstitious fancies no doubt gathered thick around these perilous spots, but what shape they took we cannot say. Nor do we know whether sacrifices were offered on the top of the mountain, though a curious discovery may perhaps be thought to indicate that they were. Sharp and lofty pinnacles of red porphyry, inaccessible to the climber, rise in imposing grandeur from the eternal snow at the summit. And here Mr. Tozer found that the rock had been perforated in various places with human habitations. One such rock-hewn dwelling winds inward for a considerable distance. Rude niches are hollowed in its sides, and on its roof and walls may be seen the marks of tools. The ancients certainly did not climb mountains for pleasure or health, and it is difficult to imagine that any motive but superstition should have led them to provide dwellings in such a place. These rock-cut chambers may have been shelters for priests charged with the performance of religious or magical rites on the summit. Part 3. Fire Worship in Cappadocia. Persian fire worship in Cappadocia, worship of natural fires which burn perpetually, the perpetual fires of Baku. Under the Persian rule, Cappadocia became, and long continued to be, a great seat of the Zoroastrian fire worship. In the time of Strabo, about the beginning of our era, the votaries of that faith and their temples were still numerous in the country. Though the perpetual fire burned on an altar, surrounded by heaps of ashes in the middle of the temple, and the priests daily chanted their liturgy before it, holding in their hands a bundle of myrtle rods, and wearing on their heads tall felt caps with cheek pieces which covered their lips, lest they should defile the sacred flame with their breath. It is reasonable to suppose that the natural fires which burned perpetually on the outskirts of Mount Argaeus attracted the devotion of the disciples of Zoroaster, for elsewhere similar fires have been the object of religious reverence down to modern times. Thus at Julamukhi, on the lower slopes of the Himalayas, jets of combustible gas issue from the earth, and a great Hindu temple, the resort of many pilgrims, is built over them. The perpetual flame, which is of a reddish hue and emits an aromatic perfume, rises from a pit in the forecourt of the sanctuary. The worshippers deliver their gifts, consisting usually of flowers, to the attendant fakirs, who hold them over the flame and then cast them into the body of the temple. Again, Hindu pilgrims make their way with great difficulty to Baku on the Caspian, in order to worship the everlasting fires which there issue from the beds of petroleum. The sacred spot is about 10 miles to the northeast of the city. An English traveller who visits Baku in the middle of the 18th century has thus described the place and the worship. There are several ancient temples built of stone supposed to have been all dedicated to fire. Most of them are arched vaults, not above 10 to 15 feet high. Amongst others, there is a little temple in which the Indians now worship. Near the altar, about 3 feet high, is a large hollow crane, from the end of which issues a blue flame, in colour and gentleness not unlike a lamp that burns with spirits, but seemingly more pure. These Indians affirm that this flame has continued ever since the flood, and they believe it will last till the end of the world, that if it were resisted or suppressed in that place, it would rise in some other. Here are generally 40 or 50 of these poor devotees who come on a pilgrimage from their own country and subsist upon wild celery and a kind of Jerusalem artichoke, which are very good food, with other herbs and roots found a little to the northward. Their business is to make expiation, not for their own sins only, but for those of others, and they continue the longer time in proportion to the number of persons for whom they have engaged to pray. They mark their foreheads with saffron, and have a great veneration for a red cow. Thus it would seem that a purifying virtue is attributed to the sacred flame, since pilgrims come to it from afar to expiate sin. Part 4. The Burnt Land of Lydia. Another volcanic region of Asia Minor is a district of Lydia, to which, on account of its remarkable appearance, the Greeks gave the name of the Burnt Land. It lies to the east of Sardes in the upper valley of the Hermes, and covers an area of about 50 miles by 40. As described by Strabo, the country was wholly treeless except for the vines, which produced a wine inferior to none of the most famous vintages of antiquity. The surface of the plains was like ashes. The hills were composed of black stone, as if they had been scorched by fire. Some people laid the scene of Typhon's battle with their gods in this black country, and supposed that it had been burnt by the thunderbolts hurled from heaven at the impious monster. The philosophic Strabo, however, held that the fires which had wrought this havoc were subterranean, not celestial, and he pointed to 3 craters at intervals of about 4 miles, each in a hill of scoriae, which he supposed to have been once molten matter ejected by the volcanoes. His observation and his theory have both been confirmed by modern science. The 3 extinct volcanoes to which he referred are still conspicuous features of the landscape. Each is a black cone of loose cinders, scoriae and ashes, with steep sides and a deep crater. From each a flood of rugged black lava has flowed forth, bursting out at the foot of the cone, and then rushing down the dale to the bed of the Immerse. The dark streams follow all the sinuosities of the valleys, their sombre hue contrasting with the rich verdure of the surrounding landscape. Their surface, broken into 1,000 fantastic forms, resembles a sea lashed into fury by a gale, and then suddenly hardened into stone. Regarded from the geological point of view, these black cones of cinders and these black rivers of lava are of comparatively recent formation. Exposure to the weather for thousands of years has not yet softened their asperities and decomposed them into vegetable mold. They are as hard and ungenial as if the volcanic stream had ceased to flow but yesterday. But in the same district there are upwards of 30 other volcanic cones. This greater age is proved by their softened forms, their smoother sides, and their mantle of vegetation. Some of them are planted with vineyards to their summits. Thus the volcanic soil is still as favourable to the cultivation of the vine as it was in antiquity. The relation between the two is noted by the ancients. Strabo compares the vines of the burnt land with the vineyards of Catania fertilized by the ashes of Mount Etna, and tells us that some ingenious persons explain the fire-born Dionysus as a myth of the grapes fostered by volcanic agency. Part 5. The Earthquake God. Earthquakes in Asia Minor, worship of Poseidon and the Earthquake God. But the inhabitants of these regions were reminded of the slumbering fires by other and less agreeable tokens than the generous juice of their grapes. For not the burnt land only, but the country to the south, including the whole valley of the Meander, was subject to frequent and violent shocks of earthquake. The soil was loose, friable, and full of salts, the ground hollow, undermined by fire and water. In particular, the city of Philadelphia was a great centre of disturbance. The shocks there, we are told, were continuous. The houses rocked, the walls cracked and gaped. The few inhabitants were kept busy repairing the breaches or buttressing and propping the edifices which threatened to tumble about their ears. Most of the citizens, indeed, had the prudence to dwell dispersed on their farms. It was a marvel, says Strabo, that such a city should have any inhabitants at all, and a still greater marvel that it should ever have been built. However, by a wise dispensation of Providence, the earthquakes which shook the foundations of their houses only strengthened those of their faith. The people of Apamea, whose town was repeatedly devastated, paid their devotions with great fervour to Poseidon, the earthquake god. Again, the island of Santorin, in the Greek archipelago, has been for thousands of years a great theatre of volcanic activity. On one occasion, the waters of the bay boiled and flamed for 4 days, and an island composed of red-hot matter rose gradually, as if hoisted by machinery, above the waves. It happened that the sovereignty of the seas was then with the Rhodians, those merchant princes whose prudent policy, strict but benevolent oligarchy, and beautiful island city, rich with the accumulated treasures of native art, rendered them in a sense the Venetians of the ancient world. So when the ebullition and heat of the eruption had subsided, their sea captains landed in the new island, and founded a sanctuary of Poseidon, the establisher or securer, a complimentary epithet often bestowed on him as a hint not to shake the earth more than he could conveniently help. In many places people sacrificed to Poseidon, the establisher, in the hope that he would be as good as his name, and not bring down their houses on their heads. Spartan propulsion on Poseidon during an earthquake. Another instance of a Greek attempt to quiet the perturbed spirit underground is instructive, because similar efforts are still made by savages in similar circumstances. Once when a Spartan army under King Adonis had taken the field, it chanced that the ground under their feet was shaken by an earthquake. It was evening, and the king was at mess with the officers of his staff. No sooner did they feel the shock than with a great presence of mind they rose from their dinner and struck up a popular hymn in honor of Poseidon. The soldiers outside the tent took up the strain, and soon the whole army joined in the sacred melody. It is not said whether the flute band which always played the Spartan redcoats into action accompanied the deep voices of the men with its shrill music. At all events, the intention of this service of praise addressed to the earth-shaking god can only have been to prevail on him to stop. I have spoken of the Spartan redcoats because the uniform of Spartan soldiers was red. As they fought in an extended, not a deep formation, the Spartan line of battle must always have been, what the British used to be, a thin red line. It was in this order, and no doubt with the music playing and the sun flashing on their arms, they advanced to meet the Persians at Thermopylae. Like Cromwell's Ironsides, these men could fight as well as sing psalms. Modes of stopping an earthquake by informing the god or giant that there are still men on the earth. If the Spartans imagined that they could stop an earthquake by a soldier's chorus, their theory and practice resembled those of many other barbarians. Thus the people of Timor in the East Indies think that the earth rests on the shoulder of a mighty giant, and that when he is weary of bearing it on one shoulder, he shifts it to the other, and so causes the ground to quake. At such times, accordingly, they all shout at the top of their voices to let him know that there are still people on the earth, for otherwise they fear lest, impatient of his burden, he might tip it into the sea. The Manichaeans held a precisely similar theory of earthquakes, except that according to them, the weary giant transferred his burden from one shoulder to the other at the end of every 30 years. A view which, at all events, points to the observation of a cycle in the recurrence of earthquake shocks. But we are told not that these heretics reduced an absurd theory to an absurd practice by raising a shout in order to remind the earth-shaker of the inconvenience he was putting them to. However, both the theory and the practice are to be found in full force in various parts of the East Indies. When the Balinese and the Sudanese feel an earthquake, they cry out, "Still alive," or "We still live," to acquaint the earth-shaking god or giant with their existence. The natives of Leti, Moa and Lakor, islands of the Indian archipelago, imagine that earthquakes are caused by Grandmother Earth in order to ascertain whether her descendants are still to the fore. So they make loud noises for the purpose of satisfying her grandmotherly solicitude. The Tami of German New Guinea ascribe earthquakes to a certain old Banku who sits under a great rock. When he stirs, the earth quakes. If the shock lasts a long time, they beat on the ground with palm branches, saying, "You down there, easy a little, we men are still here." The Shans of Burma are taught by Buddhist monks that under the world there sleeps a great fish with his tail in his mouth, but sometimes he wakes, bites his tail, and quivering in pain causes the ground to quiver and shake likewise. That is the cause of great earthquakes, but the cause of little earthquakes is different. These are produced by little men who live underground and sometimes feeling lonely knock on the roof of the world over their heads. These knockings we perceive as slight shocks of earthquakes. When Shans feel such a shock, they run out of their houses, kneel down, and answer the little men saying, "We are here, we are here." Earthquakes are common in the Pampa del Sacramento of eastern Peru. The Conibos, a tribe of Indians on the left bank of the great Ucayali River, attribute these disturbances to the Creator, who usually resides in heaven, but comes down from time to time to see whether the work of his hands still exists. The result of his descent is an earthquake. So when one happens, these Indians rush out of their huts with extravagant gestures, shouting, as if in answer to a question, "A moment, here I am, Father, here I am." Their intention is, no doubt, to assure their Heavenly Father that they are still alive, and that they may return to his mansion on high with an easy mind. They never remember the Creator, nor pay him any heed except at an earthquake. In Africa, the Atonga tribe of Lake Nyasa used to believe that an earthquake was the voice of God, calling to inquire whether his people were all there. So when the rumble was heard underground, they all shouted in answer, "Ye, ye," and some of them went to the mortars used for pounding corn and beat them with pestles. They thought that if one of them did not thus answer to the divine call, he would die. In Arawira, the people think that an earthquake is caused by a dead sultan marching past underground. So they stand up to do him honor, and some raise their hands to the salute. Were they omit these marks of respect to the deceased, they would run the risk of being swallowed up alive. The Baganda of Central Africa used to attribute earthquakes to a certain god named Musisi, who lived underground and set the earth in a tremor when he moved about. At such times, persons who had fetishes to hand patted them and begged the god to be still. Women who were with their child patted their bellies to keep the god from taking either their own life or that of their unborn babes. Others raised a shrill cry to induce him to remain quiet. Conduct of the Bataks during an earthquake. When the Bataks of Sumatra feel an earthquake, they shout, "The handle, the handle." The meaning of the cry is variously explained. Some say that it contains a delicate allusion to the sword which is thrust up to the hilt into the body of the demon or serpent who shakes the earth. Thus explained, the words are a jeer or taunt, levelled at that mischievous being. Others say that when Batara Guru, the Creator, was about to fashion the earth, he began by building a raft, which he commanded a certain Naga Padoa to support. While he was hard at work, his chisel broke. At the same moment, Nagata Padoa budged under his burden. Therefore, Batara Guru said, "Hold hard a moment." The handle of the chisel is broken off, and that is why the Bataks call out the handle of the chisel during an earthquake. They believe that the deluded Naga Padoa will take the words for the voice of the Creator and that he will hold hard accordingly. Various modes of prevailing upon the earthquake god to stop. When the earth quakes in some parts of Celebes, it is said that all the inhabitants of a village will rush out of their houses and grab up grass by handfuls in order to attract the attention of the earth spirit, who, feeling his hair thus torn out by the roots, will be painfully conscious that there are still people above ground. So in Samoa, during shocks of earthquake, the natives sometimes ran and threw themselves on the ground, gnawed the earth, and shouted frantically to the earthquake god Mafui to desist lest he should shake the earth to pieces. They consoled themselves with the thought that Mafui has only one arm, saying, "If he had two, what a shake he would give." The Bagabos of the Philippine Islands believe that the earth rests on a great post, which a large serpent is trying to remove. When the serpent shakes the post, the earth quakes. At such times the Bagabos beat their dogs to make them howl, for the howling of the animals frightens the serpent, and he stops shaking the post. Hence, so long as the earthquake lasts, the howls of the dogs may be heard to proceed from every house in a Bagabo village. The Tongans think that the earth is supported on the prostrate form of the god Moi. When he is tired of lying in one posture, he tries to turn himself about, and that causes an earthquake. Then the people shout and beat the ground with sticks to make him lie still. During an earthquake, the Burmese make a great uproar, beating the walls of their houses and shouting to frighten away the evil genius who is shaking the earth. On a like occasion, and for a like purpose, some natives of the Gazelle Peninsula in New Britain beat drums and blow on shells. The Dorasquis, an Indian tribe of Panama, believe that the volcano of Chiriqui was inhabited by a powerful spirit, who, when his anchor, caused an earthquake. At such times, the Indians shot volleys of arrows in the direction of the volcano to terrify him and make him desist. Some of the Peruvian Indians regarded an earthquake as a sign that the gods were thirsty, so they poured water on the ground. In Ashanti, several persons used to be put to death after an earthquake. They were slain as a sacrifice to Sasabosnan, the earthquake god, in the hope of satiating his cruelty for a time. Houses which had been thrown down or damaged by an earthquake were sprinkled with human blood before they were rebuilt. When part of the wall of the king's house at Kumasi was knocked down by an earthquake, 50 young girls were slaughtered, and the mud to be used in the repairs was kneaded with their blood. Religious and moral effects of earthquakes. An English resident in Fiji attributed a sudden access of piety in Kantavu, one of the islands, to a tremendous earthquake which destroyed many of the natives. The Fijians think that their islands rest on a god who causes earthquakes by turning over in his sleep, so they sacrifice to him things of great value in order that he may turn as gently as possible. In Nias, a violent earthquake has a salutary effect on the morals of the natives. I suppose that it is brought about by a certain Batu Badano, who intends to destroy the earth because of the iniquity of mankind. So they assemble and fashion a great image out of the trunk of a tree. They make offerings, they confess their sins, they correct the fraudulent weights and measures, they vow to do better in the future, they implore mercy, and if the earth has escaped, they throw a little gold into the fissure. But when the danger is over, all their fine vows and promises are soon forgotten. The god of the sea and the earthquake naturally conceived as one. We may surmise that in those Greek lands which have suffered severely from earthquakes, such as Achaia on the western coast of Asia Minor, Poseidon was worshipped not less as an earthquake god than as a sea god. It is to be remembered that an earthquake is often accompanied by a tremendous wave which comes rolling in like a mountain from the sea, swamping the country far and wide. Indeed, on the coasts of Chile and Peru, which have often been devastated by both, the wave is said to be even more dreaded than the earthquake. The Greeks often experienced this combination of catastrophes, this conspiracy, as it were, of earth and sea against the life and works of man. It was thus that Attis, on the coast of Achaia, perished with all its inhabitants on a winter night, overwhelmed by the billows, and its destruction was set down to the wrath of Poseidon. Nothing could be more natural than that to people familiar with the twofold calamity, the dreadful god of the earthquake and of the sea should appear to be one and the same. The historian Diodotus Seleucus observes that Peloponnese was deemed to have been in ancient days the abode of Poseidon, and the whole country was in a manner sacred to him, and that every city in it worshipped him above all the gods. The devotion to Poseidon, he explains, partially by the earthquakes and floods by which the land has been visited, partially by the remarkable chasms and subterranean rivers which are a conspicuous feature of its limestone mountains. Part 6. The Worship of Mephitic Vapors. Poisonous mephitic vapors. But eruptions and earthquakes, though the most tremendous, are not the only phenomena of volcanic regions which have affected the religion of the inhabitants. Poisonous mephitic vapors and hot springs, which abound especially in volcanic regions, have also had their devotees, and both are, or were formerly, to be found in those western districts of Asia Minor with which we are here concerned. To begin with vapors, we may take as an illustration of their deadly effect the Goevo Ubaz, or Valley of Poison, near Batur in Java. It is the crater of an extinct volcano, about half a mile in circumference, and from 30 to 35 feet deep. Neither man nor beast can descend to the bottom and live. The ground is covered with the carcasses of tigers, deer, birds, and even the bones of men, all killed by the abundant emanations of carbonic acid gas which exhale from the soil. Animals let down into it die in a few minutes. The whole range of hills is volcanic. 2 neighboring craters constantly emit smoke. In another crater of Java, near the volcano Talaga Bodas, the sulphurous exhalations have proved fatal to tigers, birds, and countless insects. And the soft parts of these creatures, such as fibers, muscles, hair, and skin, are well preserved, while the bones are corroded or destroyed. Places of Pluto or Charon, the valley of Amsanctus. The ancients were acquainted with such noxious vapours in their own country, and they regarded the vents from which they were discharged as entrances to the infernal regions. The Greeks called them places of Pluto, Plutonia, or places of Charon, Charonia. In Italy, the vapours were personified as a goddess who bore the name of Mephidis and was worshipped in various parts of the peninsula. She had a temple in the famous valley of Amsanctus in the land of the Ripini, where the exhalations, supposed to be the breath of Pluto himself, were of so deadly a character that all who set foot on the spot died. The place is a glen, partially watered with chestnut trees, among limestone hills, distant about 4 miles from the town of Fragento. Here, under a steep shelving bank of decomposed limestone, there is a pool of dark ash-coloured water, which constantly bubbles up with an explosion like distant thunder. A rapid stream of the same brackish water rushes into the pool from under the barren rocky hill, but the fall is not more than a few feet. A little high up are apertures in the ground, through which warm blasts of sulphuretted hydrogen are constantly issuing with more or less noise, according to the size of the holes. These blasts are no doubt why the ancients deemed the breath of Pluto. The pool is now called Mephite, and the holes Mephitnel. On the other side of the pool is a smaller pond called the Kokao, or cauldron, because it appears to be perpetually boiling. Thick masses of mephitic vapour, visible 100 yards off, float in rapid undulations on its surface. The exhalations given off by these waters are sometimes fatal, especially when they are borne on a high wind. But as the carbonic acid gas does not naturally rise more than 2 or 3 feet from the ground, it is possible in calm weather to walk round these pools, though the stoop is difficult and to fall would be dangerous. The ancient temple of Mephidis has been replaced by a shrine of the martyred Sancta Felicita. Sanctuaries of Charon or Pluto in Caria. Similar discharges of poisonous vapours took place at various points in the volcanic district of Caria, and were the object of superstitious veneration in antiquity. Thus at the village of Thimbria there was a sacred cave which gave out deadly emanations, and the place was deemed a sanctuary of Charon. A similar cave might be seen in the village of Acharaka, near Nissa, in the valley of the Meander. Here below the cave was a fine grove with a temple dedicated to Pluto and Persephone. The place was sacred to Pluto, yet sick people resorted to it for the restoration of their health. They lived in the neighbouring village, and the priests prescribed for them according to the revelations which they received from the 2 deities in dreams. Often the priests would take the patients to the cave and leave them there for days without food. Sometimes the sufferers themselves were favoured with revelations and dreams, but they always acted under the spiritual direction of the priests. To all but the sick, the place was unapproachable and fatal. Once a year a festival was held in the village, and then afflicted folk came in crowds to be rid of their ailments. About the hour of noon, on that day, a number of athletic young men, their naked bodies greased with oil, used to carry a bull up to the cave and there let it go. But the beast had not taken a few steps into the cavern before it fell to the ground and expired. So deadly was the vapour. Sanctuary of Pluto at the Lydian or Phrygian Hierapolis. Another Plutonian sanctuary of the same sort existed at Hierapolis, in the upper valley of the Meander, on the borders of Lydia and Phrygia. Here, under a brow of the hill, there was a deep cave with a narrow mouth just large enough to admit the body of a man. A square space in front of the cave was railed off, and within the railing there hung so thick a cloudy vapour that it was hardly possible to see the ground. In calm weather, people could step up to the railing with safety, but to pass within it was instant death. Bulls driven into the enclosure fell to the earth and were dragged out lifeless. The sparrows, which spectators by way of experiment allowed to fly into the mist, dropped dead at once. Yet the eunuch priest of the great mother goddess could enter the railed-off air with impunity, nay more. They used to go up to the very mouth of the cave, stoop, and creep into it for a certain distance, holding their breath, for there was a look on their faces is if they were being choked. Some people ascribe the immunity of the priest to the divine protection, others to the use of antidotes. Part 7. The Worship of Hot Springs. The hot springs and petrified cascades of Hierapolis. The mysterious chasm of Hierapolis, with its deadly mist, has not been discovered in modern times. Indeed, it would seem to have vanished even in antiquity. It may have been destroyed by an earthquake, but another marvel of the sacred city remains to this day. The hot springs with their calcareous deposit, which, like a wizard's wand, turns all that it touches to stone, excited the wonder of the ancients, and the course of ages has only enhanced the fantastic splendor of the great transformation scene. The stately ruins of Hierapolis occupy a broad shelf or terrace on the mountainside, commanding distant views of extraordinary beauty and grandeur. From the dark precipices and dazzling snows of Mount Cadmus, away to the burnt summits of Phrygia, fading in the rosy tints into the blue of the sky. Hills, broken by wooded ravines, rise behind the city. In front, the terrace falls away in cliffs 300 feet high into the desolate treeless valley of the Lycus. Over the face of these cliffs, the hot streams have poured or trickled for thousands of years, encrusting them with a pearly white substance like salt or driven snow. The appearance of the whole is as if a mighty river, some 2 miles broad, had been suddenly arrested in the act of falling over a great cliff and transformed into white marble. It is a petrified Niagara. The illusion is strongest in winter or in cool summer mornings when the mist from the hot springs hangs in the air like a veil of spray resting on the foam of the waterfall. A closer inspection of the white cliff, which attracts the traveller's attention at a distance of 20 miles, only adds to its beauty and changes one illusion for another. For now it seems to be a glacier, its long pendant stalactites looking like icicles, and the snowy whiteness of its smooth expanse being tinged here and there with delicate hues of blue, rose and green, or the colours of the rainbow. These petrified cascades of Hierapolis are among the wonders of the world. Indeed, they have probably been without a rival in their kind ever since the famous white and pink terraces or staircases of Rotomanhana in New Zealand were destroyed by a volcanic eruption. The hot pool of Hierapolis with its deadly exhalations. The hot springs which have wrought these miracles at Hierapolis rise in a large deep pool among the vast and imposing ruins of the ancient city. The water is of a greenish-blue tint, but clear and transparent. At the bottom may be seen the white marble columns of a beautiful Corinthian colonnade, which must formerly have encircled the sacred pool. Shimmering through the green-blue water, they look like the ruins of a naiad's palace. Clumps of oleanders and pomegranate trees overhang the little lake and add to its charm. Yet, the enchanted spot has its dangers. Bubbles of carbonic acid gas rise incessantly from the bottom and mount like flickering particles of silver to the surface. Birds and beasts which come to drink of the water are sometimes found dead on the bank, stifled by the noxious vapour, and the villagers tell of bathers who have been overpowered by it and drowned, or dragged down, as they say, to death by the water spirit. Deposits left by the waters of Hierapolis. The streams of hot water, no longer regulated by the care of a religious population, have for centuries been allowed to overflow their channels and to spread unchecked over the tableland. By the deposit which they leave behind, they have raised the surface of the ground many feet, their white ridges concealing the ruins and impeding the footstep, except where the old channels, filled up solidly to the brim, now form hard level footpaths, from which the traveller may survey the strange scene without quitting the saddle. In antiquity, the husbandmen used purposely to lead the water in rills round their lands, and thus in a few years their fields and vineyards were enclosed with walls of solid stone. The water was also peculiarly adapted for the dyeing of woolen stuffs, tinged with dyes extracted from certain roots. It imparted to clothes dipped in it the finest shades of purple and scarlet. Hercules, the patron of hot springs. We cannot doubt that Hierapolis owed its reputation as a holy city in great part to its hot springs and mephitic vapours. The curative virtue of mineral and thermal springs was well known to the ancients, and it would be interesting, if it were possible, to trace the causes which have gradually eliminated the superstitious elements from the use of such waters, and so coveted many old seats of volcanic religion into the medicinal baths of modern times. It was an article of Greek faith that all hot springs were sacred to Hercules. Whoever heard of cold baths that was sacred to Hercules? Asks in justice to Aristophanes, and justice admits that the brawny hero's patronage of hot baths was the excuse alleged by young men for sprawling all day in the steaming water when they ought to have been sweating in the gymnasium. Hot springs were said to have been first produced for the refreshment of Hercules after his labours. Some ascribe their kindly thought and deed to Athena, others to Hephaestus, and others to nymphs. The warm water of these sources appears to have been used especially to heal diseases of the skin. For a Greek proverb, the itch of Hercules, was applied to persons in need of hot baths or for the scab. On the strength of his connection with medicinal springs, Hercules set up a patron of the healing art. In heaven, if we can trust Lucian, he even refused to give place to Aesculapius himself, and the difference between the two deities led to a very unseemly brawl. "Do you mean to say," demanded Hercules of his father Zeus in a burst of indignation, "that this apothecary is to sit down to table before me?" To this the apothecary replied with much acrimony, recalling certain painful episodes in the private life of the burly hero. Finally the dispute was settled by Zeus, who decided in favour of Aesculapius on the ground that he died before Hercules and was therefore entitled to rank as senior god. Hot springs of Hercules at Thermopylae. Among the hot springs sacred to Hercules, the most famous were those which rose in the pass of Thermopylae, and gave to the defile its name of the Hot Gates. The warm baths, called by the natives the pots, were enlarged and improved for the use of invalids by the wealthy sophist Herodes in the 2nd century of our era. An altar of Hercules stood beside them. According to one story, the hot springs were here produced for his refreshment by the goddess Athena. They exist to this day, apparently unchanged, although the recession of the sea has converted what used to be a narrow pass into a wide swampy flat, through which the broad but shallow, turbid stream of the Spercheius creeps sluggishly seaward. On the other side, the rugged mountains descend in crags and precipices to the pass, their grey rocky sides tufted with low wood or bushes wherever vegetation can find a foothold, and their summits fringed along the skyline with pines. They remind us Scotchmen of the crags, knolls, and mounds confusedly hurled, in which Ben Venue comes down to the silver strand of Loch Katrine. The principal spring bursts from the rocks, just at the foot of the steepest and loftiest part of the range. All forming a small pool, it flows into a rapid stream eastward, skirting the foot of the mountains. The water is so hot that it is almost painful to hold the hands in it, at least near the source, and steam rises thickly from its surface along the course of the brook. Indeed, the clouds of white stream and the strong sulphur smell acquaint the traveller with his approach to the famous spot before he comes in sight of the springs. The water is clear, but has the appearance of being of a deep sea blue or sea green colour. This appearance it takes from the thick slimy deposits of blue-green sulphur which line the bed of the stream. From its source the blue, streaming, sulphur-reeking brook rushes eastward for a few hundred yards at the foot of the mountain, and is then joined by the water of another spring, which rises much more tranquilly in a sort of natural bath along the rocks. The sides of this bath are not so thickly coated with sulphur as the banks of the stream, hence its water, about 2 feet deep, is not so blue. Just beyond it there is a second and larger bath, which from its square shape and smooth sides would seem to be in part artificial. These two baths are probably the pots mentioned by ancient writers. They are still used by bathers, and a few wooden dressing rooms are provided for the accommodation of visitors. Some of the water is conducted in an artificial channel to turn a mill about half a mile off at the eastern end of the pass. The rest crosses the flat to find its way to the sea. In a passage it is coated the swampy ground with a white crust, which sounds hollow under the tread. Hot Springs of Hercules at Attis. We may conjecture that these remarkable springs furnish the principal reason for associating Hercules with this district, and for laying the scene of his fiery death on the top of the neighbouring Mount Oeta. The district is volcanic, and has often been shaped by earthquakes. Across the strait, the island of Euboea has suffered from the same cause and at the same time, and on its southern shore, sulphurous springs, like those of Thermopylae, but much hotter and more powerful, were in like manner dedicated to Hercules. The strong medicinal qualities of the waters, which are especially adapted for the cure of skin diseases and gout, have attracted patients in ancient and modern times. Sulla took the waters here for his gout, and the days of Plutarch, the neighbouring town of Attis, situated in a green valley about 2 miles from the springs, was one of the most fashionable resorts of Greece. Elegant and commodious buildings, an agreeable country, and abundance of fish and game united with the health-giving properties of the baths to draw crowds of idlers to the place, especially in the prime of the glorious Greek spring, the height of the season at Attis. While some watched the dancers dancing or listened to the strains of the harp, others passed the time in discourse, lounging in the shade of cloisters, or pacing the shore of the beautiful strait with its prospect of mountains beyond mountains, immortalized in story across the water. Of all this Greek elegance and luxury, hardly a vestige remains. Yet the healing springs flow now as freely as of old. In the course of time, the white-yellow calcareous deposit which the water leaves behind it has formed a hillock at the foot of the mountains, and the stream now falls in a streaming cascade from the face of the rock into the sea. Once after an earthquake, the springs ceased to flow for 3 days. At the same time, the hot springs of Thermopylae dried up. The incident proves the relation of these baths of Hercules on both sides of the strait to each other and to volcanic agency. On another occasion, a cold spring suddenly burst out beside the hot springs of Attis, and as its water was supposed to be peculiarly beneficial to health, patients hastened from far and near to drink of it. But the generals of King Adonis, anxious to raise a revenue, imposed a tax on the use of the water, and the spring, as even discussed had been turned to so base a use, disappeared as suddenly as it had come. Reasons for the association of Hercules with hot springs. The association of Hercules with hot springs was not confined to Greece itself. Greek influence extended it to Sicily, Italy, and even to Dacia. Why the hero should have been chosen as the patron of thermal waters, it is hard to say. Yet it is worthwhile perhaps to remember that such springs combine in a manner the twofold and seemingly discordant principles of water and fire, of fertility and destruction, and that the death of Hercules in the flames seems to connect him with the fiery element. Further, the apparent conflict of the two principles is by no means an absolute, as at first sight we might be tempted to suppose, for heat is as necessary as moisture to the support of animal and vegetable life. Even volcanic fires have their beneficent aspect, since their products lend a more generous flavour to the juice of the grape. The ancients themselves, as we have seen, perceived the connection between good wine and volcanic soil, and proposed more or less seriously to interpret the vine god Dionysus as a child of the fire. As a patron of hot springs, Hercules combined the genial elements of heat and moisture, and may therefore have stood, in one of his many aspects, for the principle of fertility. The hot springs of Calirrhoe in Moab. In Syria, childless women still resort to hot springs in order to procure offspring from the saint or the genie of the waters. This, for example, they do at the famous hot springs in the land of Moab, which flow through a wild gorge into the Dead Sea. In antiquity, the springs went by the Greek name of Calirrhoe, the fair flowing. It was to them that the dying herald, weighed down by a complication of disorders which the pious Jews traced to God's vengeance, repaired in the vain hope of arresting or mitigating the fatal progress of disease. The healing waters brought no alleviation of his sufferings, and he retired to Jericho to die. The hot springs burst in various places from the sides of a deep aromatic ravine to form a large and rapid stream of lukewarm water, which rushes down the depths of the Lynn, dashing and foaming over boulders under the dense shade of tamarisk trees and cane brakes. The rocks beneath the bank draped with an emerald fringe of maidenhair fern. One of the springs falls from a high rocky shelf over the face of a cliff which is tainted bright yellow by the sulphurous water. The lofty crags which shut in the narrow chasm are bold and imposing in outline and varied in colour, for they range from red sandstone through white and yellow limestone to black basalt. The waters issue from the line where the sandstone and limestone meet. Their temperature is high, and from great clefts in the mountain sides you may see clouds of steam rising and hear the rumbling of the running waters. The bottom of the glen is clothed and half choked with rank vegetation. For situated far below the level of the sea, the hot ravine is almost African in climate and flora. Here grow dense thickets of canes with their feathery tufts that shake and nod in every passing breath of wind. Here the oleander flourishes with its dark green glossy foliage and its beautiful pink blossoms. Here tall date palms rear their stately heads wherever the hot springs flow. Gorgeous flowers, too, carpet the ground. Splendid order-branches, some pinkish purple, some bright yellow, grow in large tufts, each flower stalk more than 3 feet high and covered with blossoms from the ground upwards. An exquisite rose-coloured geranium abounds among the stones, and where the soil is a little richer than usual, it is a mass of the night-scented stalk, while the crannies of the rocks are gay with scarlet rannan colours and masses of sorrel and cyclamen. Over all this luxuriant vegetation flit great butterflies of brilliant hues. Looking down the far-stretching gorge to its mouth, you see in the distance the purple hills of Judah framed between the walls of black basaltic columns on the one side and of bright red sandstone on the other. Prayers and sacrifices offered to the hot springs of Calero. Every year in the months of April and May, the Arabs resort in crowds to the glen to benefit by the waters. They take up their quarters in huts made of the reeds which they cut in the thickets. They bathe in the steaming water, or allow it to splash on their bodies as it gushes in a powerful jet from a crevice in the rocks. But before they indulge in these ablutions, the visitors, both Muslim and Christian, propitiate the spirit or genius of the place by sacrificing a sheep or goat at the spring and allowing its red blood to tinge the water. Then they bathe in what they call the baths of Solomon. Legend runs that Solomon the Wise made his bathing place here, and in order to keep the water always warm, he commanded the jinn never to let the fire die down. The jinn obey his orders to this day, but sometimes they slacken their efforts, and then the water runs low and cool. When the bathers perceive that, they say, "O Solomon, bring green wood, dry wood." And no sooner have they said so than the water begins to gurgle and steam as before. Sick people tell the saint or sheikh, who lives invisible in the springs, all about their ailments. They point out to him the precise spot that is the seat of the malady. It may be the back, or the head, or the legs, and if the heat of the water diminishes, they call out, "Thy bath is cold, O sheikh, thy bath is cold." Whereupon the obliging sheikh stokes up the fire, and out comes the water boiling. But if in spite of their remonstrances the temperature of the spring continues low, they say that the sheikh is gone on pilgrimage, and they shout to him to hasten his return. Barren Muslim women also visit these hot springs to obtain children, and they do the same at the similar baths near Karak. In the latter place, the childless woman has been known to address the spirit of the waters, saying, "O Sheikh Solomon, I am not yet an old woman, give me children." The respect thus paid by Arab men and women to the Sheikh Solomon is his hot springs may help us to understand the worship which at similar spots Greek men and women used to render their hero Hercules. As the idea of manly strength, he may have been deemed the father of many of his worshippers. The Greek wives may have gone on pilgrimage to his steaming waters in order to obtain the wish of their hearts. Part 8. The Worship of Volcanoes in Other Lands. Worship of volcanic phenomena in other lands. How far these considerations may serve to explain the custom of burning Hercules or gods identified with him in effigy or in the person of a human being is a question which deserves to be considered. It might be more easily answered if we were better acquainted with analogous customs in other parts of the world, but our information with regard to the worship of volcanic phenomena in general appears to be very scanty. However, a few facts may be noted. The great volcano of Kirau in Hawaii. The largest active crater in the world is Kirau in Hawaii. It is a huge cauldron, several miles in circumference and hundreds of feet deep, the bottom of which is filled with boiling lava in a state of terrific ebullition. From the red surge rise many black cones or insulated craters, belching columns of grey smoke or pyramids of brilliant flame from their roaring mouths, while torrents of blazing lava roll down their sides to flow into the molten, tossing sea of fire below. The scene is especially impressive by night, when flames of sulphurous blue or metallic red sweep across the heaving billows of the infernal lake, casting broad glare on the jagged sides of the insulated craters, which shoot up eddying streams of fire with a continuous roar, varied at frequent intervals by loud detonations as spherical masses of fusing lava or bright ignited stones are hurled into the air. It is no wonder that so appalling a spectacle should have impressed the imagination of the natives and filled it with ideas of the dreadful beings who inhabit the fiery abyss. They consider the great crater, we are told, as a primeval abode of their volcanic deities. The black cones that rise like islands from the burning lake appeared to them the houses where the gods often amuse themselves by playing at draughts. The roaring of the furnaces and the crackling of the flames were the music of their dance, and the red flaming surge was the surf wherein they played, sportively swimming on the rolling wave. The divinities of the volcano, offerings to the volcano, priestesses impersonating the goddess of the volcano. From these fearful divinities they had appropriate names. One was the king of steam or vapor, another the rain of night, another the husband of thunder, another the child of war with a spear of fire, another the fiery-eyed canoe breaker, another the red-hot mountain holding or lifting clouds, and so on. But above them all was a great goddess Pele. All were dreaded. They never journeyed on errands of mercy, but only to receive offerings or to execute vengeance, and their arrival in any place was announced by the convulsive trembling of the earth, by the lurid light of volcanic eruption, by the flash of lightning and the clap of thunder. The whole island was bound to pay them tribute or support their temples and devotees, and whenever the chiefs or people failed to send the proper offerings, or incurred their displeasure by insulting them or their priests or breaking their taboos which should be observed round about their craters, they filled the huge cauldron on top of Kirau with molten lava, and spouted the fiery liquid on the surrounding country, or they would march to some of their other houses, which mortals called craters, in the neighbourhood of the sinners, and rushing forth in a stream or column of fire, overwhelm the guilty. If fishermen did not bring them enough fish from the sea, they would go down, kill all the fish, fill the shoals with lava, and so destroy the fishing grounds. Hence, when the volcano was in active eruption or threatened to break out, the people used to cast vast numbers of hogs, alive or dead, into the craters or into the rolling torrent of lava, in order to appease the gods and arrest the progress of the fiery stream. To pluck certain sacred berries which grow on the mountain, to dig sand on its slopes, or to throw stones into the crater were acts particularly offensive to the deities, who would instantly rise in volumes of smoke, crush the offender under a shower of stones, or so involve him in thick darkness and rain that he could never find his way home. However, it was lawful to pluck and eat of the sacred berries, if only a portion of them were first offered to the goddess Pele. The offerer would take a branch laden with clusters of the beautiful red and yellow berries, and standing on the edge of the abyss and looking towards the place where the smoke rose in densest volumes, he would say, "Pele, here are your berries. I offer some to you. Some I also eat." With that he would throw some of the berries into the crater and eat the rest. A kind of brittle volcanic glass, of a dark olive colour and semi-transparent, is found on the mountain in the shape of filaments as fine as human hair. The natives call it the hair of the goddess Pele. Worshippers used to cast locks of their own hair into the crater of Kireo as an offering to the dreadful goddess who dwelt in it. She had also a temple at the bottom of a valley, where stood a number of rude stone idols wrapped in white and yellow cloth. Once a year the priests and devotees of Pele assembled there to perform certain rites and to feast on hogs, dogs and fruit, which the pious inhabitants of Hamakua brought to the holy place in great abundance. This annual festival was intended to propitiate the volcanic goddess and thereby to secure the country from earthquakes and floods of molten lava. The goddess of the volcano was supposed to inspire people, though to the carnal eye the inspiration resembled intoxication. One of these inspired priestesses solemnly affirmed to an English missionary that she was the goddess Pele herself, and as such immortal. Assuming a haughty air, she said, "I am Pele, I shall never die, and those who follow me, when they die, if part of their bones be taken to Kireo, the name of the volcano, will live with me in the bright fires there." For the worshippers of Pele threw a pair of bones of their dead into the volcano, under the impression that the spirits of the deceased would then be admitted to the society of the volcanic deities, and that their influence would preserve the survivors from the ravages of volcanic fire. Sacrifices to volcanoes, human victims thrown into volcanoes, annual sacrifices to the volcano Bromo in Java. This last belief may help to explain a custom, which some people have observed, of throwing human victims into volcanoes. The intention of such a practice need not be simply to appease the dreadful volcanic spirits by ministering to their fiendish lust of cruelty. It may be a notion that the souls of the men or women who have been burnt to death in the crater will join the host of demons in the fiery furnace, mitigate their fury, and induce them to spare the works and the life of man. But, however we may explain the custom, it has been usual in various parts of the world to throw human beings as well as less precious offerings into the craters of active volcanoes. Thus the Indians of Nicaragua used to sacrifice men, women and children to the active volcano Masaya, flinging them into the craters. We are told that the victims went willingly to their fate. In the island of Seo, to the north of Celebes, a child was formally sacrificed every year in order to keep the volcano Guwang Awu quiet. The poor wretch was tortured to death at a festival which lasted 9 days. In later times, the place of the child has been taken by a wooden puppet, which is hacked to pieces in the same way. The Galilees of Halmahera say that the Sultan of Ternate used annually to require some human victims who were cast into the crater of the volcano to save the island from its ravages. In Java, the volcano Bromo, or Bromok, is annually worshipped by people who throw offerings of coconuts, plantains, mangoes, rice, chickens, cakes, cloth, money, and so forth into the crater. To the Tengarees, an aboriginal heathen tribe inhabiting the mountains of which Bromo is the central crater, the festival of making offerings to the volcano is the greatest of the year. It is held at full noon in the 12th month, the day being fixed by the high priest. Each household prepares its offerings the night before. Fairly early in the morning, the people set out by moonlight for Mount Bromo. Men, women and children, all arrayed in their best. Before they reach the mountain, they must cross a wide sandy plain, where the spirits of the dead are supposed to dwell, until by means of the festival of the dead, they obtain admittance to the volcano. It is a remarkable sight to see thousands of people streaming across the level sand from 3 different directions. They have to descend into it from the neighbouring heights, and the horses break into a gallop when, after the steep descent, they reach the level. The gay and varied colours of the dresses, the fantastic costumes of the priests, the offerings borne along, the whole lit up by the warm beams of the rising sun, lent to the spectacle a peculiar charm. All assemble at the foot of the crater, where a market is held for offerings and refreshments. The scene is a lively one, for hundreds of people must now pay the vows which they made during the year. The priests sit in a long row on mats, and when the high priest appears, the people pray, saying, "Bromo, we thank thee for thy gifts and benefits, with which thou ever blessed us, and for which we offer thee our thank offerings today. Bless us, our children, and our children's children." The prayer is over, the high priest gives the signal, and the whole multitude arises and climbs the mountain. On reaching the edge of the crater, the pontiff again blesses the offerings of food, clothes, and money, which are then thrown into the crater. Yet few of them reach the spirits for whom they are intended, for a swarm of urchins now scrambles down into the crater, and at more or less risk to life and limb, succeeds in appropriating the greater part of the offerings. The spirits, default of their duties, must take the will for the deed. Tradition says that once in a time of death a chief vowed to sacrifice one of his children to the volcano. If the mountain would bless the people with plenty of food, his prayer was answered, and he paid his vow by casting his youngest son as a thank offering into the crater. Other sacrifices to volcanoes. On the slope of Mount Semeru, another active volcano in Java, there are 2 small idols, which the natives worship and pray to when they ascend the mountain. They lay food before the images to obtain the favour of the god of the volcano. In antiquity, people cast into the craters of Etna vessels of gold and silver and all kinds of victims. If the fire swallowed up the offerings, the omen was good, but if it rejected them, some evil was sure to befall the offender. No evidence that the Asiatic custom of burning kings or gods was connected with volcanic phenomena. These examples suggest that a custom of burning men or images may possibly be derived from a practice of throwing them into the craters of active volcanoes in order to appease the dreaded spirits or gods who dwell there. But unless we reckon the fires of Mount Argeus in Cappadocia and Mount Chimera in Lycia, there is apparently no need of any mountain in Western Asia which has been in eruption within historical times. On the whole, then, we conclude that the Asiatic custom of burning kings or gods was probably in no way connected with volcanic phenomena. Yet it was perhaps worthwhile to raise the question of the connection, even though it has received only a negative answer. The whole subject of the influence which physical environment has exercised on the history of religion deserves to be studied with more attention than it has yet received. End of section 10.